Chapter 1623. Xue Hentian intervened. Shirlai, who had been paying attention to the blood cauldron, narrowed his eyes. He had been paying attention to Songfeng's spear the moment he made his move. With his cultivation, he could naturally sense that Songfeng had not held back at all. That spear was powerful enough to kill any saint below the Sun-Sky Saint stage. In Shirlai's opinion, Mujua's cultivation base was only at the fragmented profound saint realm, and he would definitely die under the spear. Even if Mujua's strength was extraordinary and he was able to kill Biao Fei, Shirlai did not think that he would be able to survive under the spear. However, reality had given him a tight slap in the face. Mujua had relied on his precise calculations and keen senses to find the weak point of the giant black spear. Furthermore, he had used his own strength to blow the giant black spear away from its trajectory. Although Shirlai did not see the power that Mujua used, Mujua's keen senses and precise calculations, as well as his superb battle awareness, made Shirlai have a whole new level of respect for him. Shirlai knew that Mujua's current cultivation was too low. If they were at the same cultivation level, Shirlai knew that Mujua would definitely be an extremely strong opponent given his battle awareness. Whoosh! A black shadow suddenly rushed over and landed beside the giant black spear that was stuck in the ground. He reached out his right hand and grabbed the handle of the giant black spear. Songfeng pulled out his giant black spear as he coldly stared at Zhuowen in the distance. A sliver of astonishment surfaced in his heart. He never imagined that this kid would actually be able to dodge his fatal spear attack. This young man's battle awareness is very strong. However, he looks very unfamiliar. I can't recognize him at all. Xue Hentian, who was sitting on the high seat, stared at Zhuowen with burning eyes. Originally, he had not taken Zhuowen seriously with his arcane-shattering saint stage cultivation level. However, the scene just now was so amazing that even Xue Hentian could not help but be amazed. Many of the guests in the elevated seats were also discussing Mujua's origin. Of course, the conclusion was that Mujua's origin was mysterious. You very well. You actually dared to kill Biao Fei in front of me. Do you not place me, Blade Vault, in your eyes at all? Songfeng's eyes were crimson red, making him look exceptionally demonic. He walked step by step towards Zhuowen, as an aura erupted from his body like a volcano. This aura was very terrifying. The pressure in the surrounding blood-red storm seemed to be dispelled by this aura. Haha, Brother Blood General, your helper is really audacious. He dared to kill Biao Fei in front of the director. This is an act of contempt for the director. Qing Song said in a neutral tone. Shui Mo frowned slightly. He cupped his hands in the direction of Songfeng and said in a clear voice, Director, Brother Mu is my helper. Moreover, he is a newcomer to the blood-refining mansion. It is pardonable that he does not know the rules of the mansion. I hope that the director can be magnanimous and forgive Brother Mu this time. Shuemo's words were watertight, saving Songfeng a lot of face. He also said that Zhuowen was a newcomer, so the newborn calf was not afraid of the tiger. All of this was pardonable. However, Songfeng coldly glanced at Shuemo and said indifferently, If there are no rules, nothing can be accomplished. Just now, I've already reminded Mujua not to kill people with a general position. Not only did he turn a deaf ear, he even killed Biao Fei in front of me. This is a provocation to me, to the blood-refining manor, and to the blood-refining manor. If we do not get rid of this man today, where will the prestige of the blood-refining mansion go in the future? After saying this, Songfeng did not stop walking. He walked step by step toward Zhuowen. With every step he took, the aura on his body rose. Zhuowen frowned slightly. He saw the yellow at his fingertips turn back into 12 drops of yellow springs, which lingered around his body. Songfeng was very strong. The heaven-defying saint stage gave him a lot of pressure. Zhuowen knew that with the current strength of his body, he was no match for Songfeng unless he summoned his saint body. It seems that Songfeng will not give up. It seems that I can only let the external incarnation of the saint body merge with my body. Zhuowen sighed. With a thought, he planned to awaken the saint body that was still refining the golden lightning body tempering slurry in the Azure Dragon Hall, and let it merge with his body. However, before he could summon the saint body, Mansion Master Xue Hentian, who had been sitting in a high position, suddenly stood up. Xue Hentian looked down at the people below and suddenly said, Song Feng, stop. Since Mu Zhuo is new here, it's fine if he doesn't know the rules, but don't hinder the first stage. Song Feng paused and turned to look at Xue Hentian, who was sitting in a high position. He then looked at Zhuowen, who was on high alert not far away. His eyes were filled with unwillingness. In the end, he took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, Mansion Master, I understand. After he finished speaking, Song Feng shot a hateful glare at Zhuowen, before leaping out of the bloody storm. After leaving the bloody storm, Song Feng said in a clear voice, There is still half an incense stick's worth of time before the bloody storm disappears. Everyone hurry up. Since Mansion Master Xue Hentian had stepped in, Song Feng naturally did not say anything. When the other generals heard that there was only half an incense stick's worth of time left, they all got busy and continued to walk toward the center of the bloody storm with their helpers. Of course, after the incident with Biao Fei, no one dared to provoke Mu Zhuo anymore. After all, this guy dared to kill a general right in front of Song Feng. Moreover, this person's strength was extraordinary. Although he was only at the fragmented profound saint stage, he was still able to survive Song Feng's spear. His strength was not to be underestimated. Zhuowen looked at Xue Hentian, who had suddenly stepped in strangely. Speaking of which, Song Feng should be Xue Hentian's most loyal subordinate. Since Xue Hentian had already given Song Feng full authority for the commander battle, it was clear that Xue Hentian trusted Song Feng. This also meant that he would not interfere in the commander battle. But now Xue Hentian had stepped in for him, a person with no background. This made Zhuowen feel that it was strange. However, Zhuowen soon noticed the blood demon in the center of the bloody storm. He saw that the blood demon's eyes were faintly looking at Xue Hentian, who was sitting in the high position. Although this glance was very ordinary, it was extremely unusual in Zhuowen's eyes. It seems that the blood demon has some relationship with Xue Hentian. The reason why Xue Hentian stepped in for me should be because of the blood demon. When he thought of this, Zhuowen became more and more afraid of the blood demon. He knew that the blood demon was supported by a force. This force was either related to Xue Hentian, or strong enough to make Xue Hentian fear it. That was why Xue Hentian was willing to give the blood demon face. From these clues, Zhuowen immediately guessed that the blood demon was not interested in being the general of the blood refining mansion. His goal was probably to enter the blood refining deity's pawn during the commander battle. After thinking through all this, Zhuowen's gaze calmed down. He knew that if his guess was correct, his life would be very safe during the commander battle because the blood demon would not let anything happen to him. Of course, if the commander battle ended, the blood demon would not care about his life or death. At that time, he would be in a dangerous situation. After all, he had offended the blood refining mansion's general manager. Song Feng would not let him off so easily. However, Zhuowen was not afraid. He knew very well that once his saint physique completely refined the golden lightning body tempering slurry, his saint physique would rise to another level. At that time, even a heaven-defying saint stage expert might not be able to kill him. Of course, if he could successfully help the blood demon obtain the position of the commander battle, he would be able to enter the blood refining deity's pond. At that time, if he broke through to the heavenly Yin saint stage, his strength would increase by leaps and bounds. Coupled with his saint physique, he would be able to compete with a heaven-defying saint stage expert. However, I should increase the power of the slaughtering netherworld finger first. Zhuowen's eyes flickered as he slowly walked toward the center of the bloody storm. The 12 drops of netherworld finger around him were supported by the void law. They shuttled back and forth in the air like 12 bolts of lightning. What's going on? The resentment in the bloody storm is diminishing. Suddenly, the other generals in the bloody storm quickly noticed something strange. This was because they realized that the resentment that could affect their minds was much less than before. It's Mu Zhuo. Look, the strange yellow water droplets around Mu Zhuo seem to be absorbing the resentment. Many of the generals noticed Mu Zhuo as he slowly walked over, especially when they noticed that along the way, countless vengeful spirits retreated. Many of them were even forced to retreat into the center of the bloody storm by the flashing yellow water droplets. With this discovery, some generals gathered behind Zhuowen. This was because there was no resentment behind Zhuowen, which saved them a lot of trouble. Of course, those who were willing to follow behind Zhuowen were generals with average strength. As for the stronger generals, they had a sense of pride in their hearts and did not want to be associated with others. Instead, they relied on their own strength to force their way into the center of the bloody storm. Zhuowen naturally noticed the group of generals following behind him, but he ignored them. At this moment, he was concentrating on controlling the netherworld finger to constantly capture the resentment. When Zhuowen absorbed all the resentment in the bloody storm, the number of netherworld finger droplets had reached 20, and the time it took for an incense stick to burn had almost passed. It's time to enter. Zhuowen muttered in a low voice as he stepped into the 100-meter radius of the bloody storm. The generals behind Zhuowen also cautiously stepped into the 100-meter radius of the bloody storm. However, after entering the center of the bloody storm, these generals immediately retreated and put some distance between themselves and Zhuowen. Their eyes were filled with complex emotions. They knew very well that if Muzhua had not absorbed the resentment, they would not have been able to enter the 100-meter radius of the bloody storm so easily. Chapter 1624. The second stage, an incense stick of time has passed. Manager Tsongfeng shouted. Immediately, the bloody storm that soared into the sky and swept across the area dissipated with a loud bang. The blood refinement square also returned to its original tranquility. The figures of the many generals standing in the center of the bloody storm were completely revealed. Zhuowen looked around. There were originally 108 generals, but now there were only 40 generals left. Even with their helpers, there were only 80 generals left standing in the square. The pressure and resentment produced by striking the blood cauldron 10 times was truly terrifying. It had directly eliminated more than half of the generals. Of course, those who were able to withstand such pressure and resentment and reach the center of the bloody storm were all elites among the 108 generals. The remaining 80 generals and helpers were basically all above the Een Sky Saint stage. Their strength could not be underestimated. Many of the guests on the viewing platform nodded their heads repeatedly. Although they had not personally experienced the terror of the blood-colored storm, they could tell just how powerful it was just by looking at the appearance of the blood-colored storm. Congratulations to all generals for successfully passing the first stage, Blood's Resentment. General Manager Tsongfeng looked around and coldly stared at Zhuowen. Then, he turned away as if nothing had happened and said in a loud voice. Next up is the second stage. The rules of the second stage are very simple. That is, everyone has to strike the blood cauldron. 5 strikes from the blood cauldron is a pass, 10 strikes is a genius, 15 strikes is a monster, and 20 strikes is a heaven's pride. Among the many experts in the blood refinement mansion, only the mansion master can be called a heaven's pride. At this point, Songfeng's voice was slightly raised. At the same time, he respectfully bowed in the direction of Xue Hentian from afar to show his respect. Songfeng's action was quite beautiful. Not only did he clearly explain the rules of the second stage, he also flattered Xue Hentian a little. Naturally, Xue Hentian enjoyed Songfeng's flattery. He raised his head slightly and revealed a smug smile. Everyone, if you want to pass the second stage, you have to strike the blood cauldron at least 5 times. Otherwise, you will be eliminated. Of course, the rules are similar this time. The general and the helper must both pass. If one of them fails, then both of them will be eliminated. If both of them pass, the one with the higher score will be the final score. After Tsongfeng finished speaking, no one objected. It was obvious that everyone agreed with the rules set by Tsongfeng. For the second round, let the contestant I've personally selected come up to the stage. As he spoke, Songfeng's sharp eyes scanned the crowd in the square. Then he suddenly pointed at a skinny man in green armor and said, Qingning, you go first this time. Qingning is above average among the 108 generals. Among these 40 people, his strength is not bad. It shouldn't be a problem for him to knock 5 times, but more than 5 times is a bit difficult. Zhuowen and Blood Devil stood side by side. Blood Devil secretly transmitted his voice to Zhuowen, telling him about Qingning's situation. Qingning stood in front of the blood cauldron. His green eyes were like the eyes of a ghost, looking extremely ferocious. He did not immediately approach the blood cauldron. Instead, he took a deep breath and slowly mobilized the saint force in his body. After 5 breaths, Qingming suddenly stepped forward and instantly swept to the front of the blood cauldron. Qingming's hands turned into snake fists and instantly stretched out like pythons. As they streaked across the air, there was a strange hissing sound. His green strength erupted and turned into a huge green snake. Ding! Qingming's fist landed on the blood cauldron. A crisp sound rang out, and an invisible wave spread out from the cauldron. The invisible wave, like ripples in water, flowed along Qingming's arm and directly rushed into the depths of his body. Qingming's body trembled and his face turned slightly pale. However, Qingming did not retreat. He stepped to the side with his right foot, and his ready left fist once again landed on the blood cauldron. This time, Qingming consecutively hit the blood cauldron twice. The 2 cauldron sounds overlapped and exploded in the square like muffled thunder. It was deafening. Qingming frowned and his face became paler and paler. He roared and braced himself against the terrifying ripples created by the 2 terrifying sounds of the blood cauldron. His right hand instantly swept out and hit the blood cauldron again. Crash! The moment the 4th cauldron sound came, an extremely terrifying pressure crushed down. Qingming's face changed drastically, and he actually took a few steps back with a grunt. The pressure was like air pressure, spreading out like a gust of wind. It blew Qingming's long green hair, making him look extraordinarily mighty. That's the 4th hit. Qingming only needs 1 more to pass. Many people were moved. 1,000 green snake shadow. Qingming snorted coldly and took a step forward. His hands were like 2 snake heads. Suddenly, green strength surged up from his body. In an instant, countless green snake shadows swept out as if there were 10,000 snakes coming out of their holes. Snake rule? Zhuo Wen's eyes narrowed slightly. He could clearly feel a strange power of law in Qingming's saint energy. This law was actually the serpent law. It was because of this serpent law that Qingming's attacks carried the shadow of a snake. Moreover, the snake shadows were not simple. When they were attached to Qingming's attacks, it was enough to increase his attack power by hundreds and thousands. It was extremely terrifying. Ding! Qingming withstood the terrifying pressure, and relied on the countless snake shadows to go against the flow. In an instant, his right fist was like lightning as it violently slammed on the surface of the blood cauldron. Suddenly, a clear cauldron sound was heard. When the blood cauldron was knocked for the 5th time, a pressure that could topple mountains and overturn seas came whistling over. Immediately, a bloody aura spat out. It was like a bloody fog that covered the area dozens of feet around the blood cauldron. Puff! The 5th cauldron sound was too terrifying, especially with the addition of the blood mist. Qingming could not withstand the terrifying pressure at all. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and was directly sent flying. After flying a few hundred meters away, Qingming's right foot stomped on the void. His entire body twisted like a snake, and he landed on the ground in a rather sorry state. 5 hits. Qingming passes. Your helper, step forward. Song Feng said indifferently. Qingming sighed lightly, but his eyes were slightly furrowed as he looked at his helper. His helper was a middle-aged man. Although the middle-aged man was also at the Yin Sky Saint stage, Qingming knew very well that his helper's strength was slightly weaker than his. Therefore, Qingming was a little worried that his helper would not be able to successfully hit the cauldron 5 times. Qingming's helper stepped forward, but the middle-aged man looked rather reserved, or rather, a little nervous. Zhuowen could even see that the middle-aged man's feet were trembling unnaturally, which surprised Zhuowen. Let's begin. The middle-aged man nodded and took a step forward. Black energy condensed in his palm, and then he struck the blood cauldron with his palm. In an instant, the middle-aged man struck 3 consecutive times above the sound of the blood cauldron. Bang! 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 The 3 sounds of the cauldron converged layer by layer, like a tsunami that shook the heavens. Then, like a waterfall from the 9 heavens, it flowed down and rumbled as it fell. The pressure was as if the entire sky was about to explode. Song Feng stared at the middle-aged man in surprise, and then shook his head. The middle-aged man was too nervous. He actually struck 3 consecutive times at the beginning. One had to know that even Qingming did not dare to strike 3 times at the beginning. After all, The pressure created by the 3 strikes was too terrifying. Even Qing Ning might not be able to withstand it, let alone Qing Ning's helper. Is this idiot courting death? Qing Ning's face turned ugly, and he could not help but curse. The middle-aged man finally panicked. He realized that he had done a very stupid thing, which was to strike 3 times at the beginning. But now, even if he regretted it, it was already too late. Because that terrifying pressure that was like the collapse of the heavens had already completely crushed down. The middle-aged man roared angrily. The black energy in his body whistled out like an angry dragon, and covered his entire body like a thick black armor. Poochie. Unfortunately, just as the middle-aged man finished setting up his defense, the pressure had already descended and landed heavily on the middle-aged man's body. Then the middle-aged man spat out a mouthful of blood, and the black energy defense around his body collapsed. Bang! Then the middle-aged man was violently thrown out. Because of the terrifying pressure, the middle-aged man's body continued to spurt out blood as he flew backward. He looked extremely miserable. In the end, the middle-aged man crashed thousands of meters away. After struggling for a while, he simply fainted. Song Feng shook his head and said indifferently, "Qing Ning is eliminated." When he said this, many people around looked at Qing Ning with a trace of pity. Qing Ning had struck the cauldron 5 times with great difficulty, but in the end, because of the helper's incompetence, he was eliminated just like that. He was really unlucky. Humph. Qing Ning's face turned green. He coldly glanced at the unconscious middle-aged man, and then immediately left the square. At this moment, Qing Ning's mood was like thousands of grass-mud horses galloping past. He had clearly passed, but because of the helper's helplessness, he was eliminated. Next, AOD. Song Feng's face was calm as he continued to announce the next contestant's name. As Song Feng announced the number one by one, the generals stepped out and began to strike the blood cauldron. Naturally, some people were happy, while others were sad. Qing Tsang stepped forward. Song Feng suddenly announced a name that attracted the attention of many generals. Qing Tsang, who was dressed in green armor and had long hair, slowly walked up. Qing Tsang's appearance naturally attracted the attention of many people. After all, he was the second general, and his strength was extraordinary. With Qing Tsang's strength, 10 strikes shouldn't be a problem. Maybe even 15. The moment Qing Tsang appeared, a storm of discussion broke out. Everyone was guessing what kind of strength Qing Tsang had. Qing Tsang stood upright. He did not make any preparations at all. He immediately took a step forward and swept to the front of the blood cauldron. Then he struck 3 times in a row with his right hand. Bang! 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 3 consecutive sounds of the cauldron rang out in the square. Everyone in the square was in an uproar. Qing Tsang knew that the middle-aged man had struck the cauldron 3 times in a row, but he still followed suit. Chapter 1625. Wager. The 3 cauldron sounds overlapped, and the pressure was like the roar of a furious dragon. A heaven-shattering pressure came crashing down. Qing Tsang stood proudly, his long hair fluttering in the wind. The pressure came crashing down, but Qing Tsang was like a boulder, unmoving. As expected of Qing Tsang, after 3 consecutive knocks, the overlaid pressure did not affect him at all. Qing Tsang's unbridled attitude immediately moved many of the guests present. There were even many female martial artists whose beautiful eyes flickered with radiance as they revealed radiant expressions. Qing Tsang laughed. Before the overlaid pressure from the 3 cauldron sounds dissipated, he moved again. His 5 fingers quickly pointed out, and a green force flew out like a shuttle, turning into countless green sword auras. Bang bang! The green aura moved like a sword, and with a clang, it pressed against the surface of the blood cauldron. Immediately, 2 deafening cauldron sounds rang out again. Along with the cauldron sounds, the surface of the blood cauldron exploded with a rich blood aura. At this moment, the pressure around the blood cauldron was uncontrollable, and a blood-colored air wave spread out in a ring shape. The eyes of the nearby generals shrunk, and they involuntarily took a few steps back. The 5 knocks were the dividing line of the blood cauldron. Once 5 knocks were made, the blood cauldron would spew out a bloody aura. With the support of the bloody aura, the pressure of the blood cauldron increased by several times. This was also why Qing Ning was in such a sorry state after 5 knocks. When the bloody aura and the pressure fell on his body, Qing Song's eyes shrunk involuntarily, and his knees bent slightly. Although the angle was very small, the people around him still noticed it. There was no doubt that the pressure of the blood cauldron had undergone a qualitative change after 5 knocks. Qing Song took a deep breath, and his right foot moved. His right thumb pinched his index finger, and then he quickly switched to his middle finger, followed by his ring finger, and then his little finger. After repeating this several times, the green aura between his 5 fingers was like a giant tree, and it suddenly erupted. At this moment, Qing Song's aura became as vast as the ocean, and it was terrifying enough to topple mountains and overturn seas. Qing Song pointed out again, and this time his finger was as sharp as a sword. Bang! The 6th cauldron chime rang out, and the blood energy in the surroundings began to churn violently. It spread from a few dozen feet to over 30 feet. The blood energy churned as if it had transformed into a terrifying beast that was roaring wantonly. Cracks began to appear on the ground around the blood cauldron. Qing Song frowned slightly, his face slightly pale as he took 2 steps back. However, Qing Song roared and took 2 more steps forward. The 5 fingers on his right hand kept changing. The cyan energy turned into countless sword qi. Qing Song quickly pointed at the blood cauldron twice. Bang bang. The 2 cauldron sounds were getting scarier and scarier. As they stacked together, the blood qi rumbled even more violently. It turned into a gigantic beast that roared out. A gigantic invisible beast claw slashed down from the blood qi, as though it wanted to crush Qing Song to death. Puchi. Qing Song's expression changed slightly, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. The moment the beast's claw came down, he pointed his right hand towards the sky and sword qi filled the sky. Instantly, countless cyan sword shadows appeared in the sky and surrounded Qing Song. Rumble. The 2 attacks collided. Qing Song retreated several dozen meters, but the invisible beast's claw did not give up. Qing Song roared and pointed his left hand. Suddenly, more cyan energy surged out of Qing Song's body. The cyan energy took the shape of swords, and they looked like sharp cyan swords. Zhuowen knew from Blood Demon that Qing Song cultivated the law of the cyan sword. The cyan energy in his body contained dense sword qi that could be turned into sword qi at any time. It was extremely sharp and powerful. 10,000 swords into one. Qing Song looked serious. He put his 10 fingers together, and the endless cyan sword qi merged together to form a gigantic sword that was a few hundred meters long. Slash. Qing Song pointed his right finger at the void. Suddenly, the gigantic cyan sword slashed down, and the invisible beast's claw collapsed. Even the blood qi above the blood cauldron tumbled recklessly under the impact of the gigantic sword qi. It showed signs of dissipating. Qing Song's cyan sword technique has been cultivated to such a level. No wonder he was so confident before. Blood Demon frowned and his voice was filled with fear. Song Feng slowly opened his eyes and nodded at Qing Song with a satisfied look on his face. The 9th sound. Qing Song snorted. He stomped his right foot on the ground, and leaped up to the hilt of the gigantic sword. He twisted his waist in the air, and kicked the hilt with his left foot. Swoosh. The gigantic cyan sword was like a flash of cyan lightning. It tore through the void and slammed into the blood cauldron with a terrifying power. Bang. The sword arrived and the blood cauldron rumbled. The blood qi in the sky condensed into a gigantic blood exotic beast. It fell from the sky and grabbed at the gigantic cyan sword. Slash again. However, Qing Song was not afraid at all. He completely ignored the blood-colored exotic beast, and took the risk to direct the giant green sword to fall, and hit the blood cauldron violently. The 10th sound rang out leisurely. Then the wind and clouds in the sky changed. The blood-colored beast suddenly rushed over and slammed its claw on the giant green sword. Then its blood aura expanded and turned into a terrifying blood fog. Within the blood fog, a terrifying resentment rushed down like lightning. The gigantic cyan sword was quite powerful. The blood exotic beast was indeed powerful, but it could not do anything to the sword. However, the resentment spirit from the blood mist was much more terrifying than the blood exotic beast. It was like maggots that clung to the bones and instantly covered the area around the gigantic cyan sword. Soon, the gigantic cyan sword collapsed under the influence of the resentment spirit. Qing Song spat out a mouthful of blood as pain and malevolence filled his face. He retreated until he reached the edge of the square before stopping. His eyes were filled with fear as he looked at the blood cauldron. 10 times, Qing Song really hit the cauldron 10 times. How terrifying. 10 hits is enough to be called a genius. Qing Song is indeed the second general. Just 10 hits from the blood cauldron is enough to dominate the other generals. The moment Qing Song hit the cauldron for the 10th time, the crowd burst into an uproar. Qing Song was the first general to hit the cauldron 10 times. Qing Song, you've hit the blood cauldron 10 times. You're promoted. Song Feng nodded at Qing Song with a look of admiration. Qing Song took a deep breath and calmed the boiling blood qi in his body. He cupped his hands at Song Feng and walked down the square. He walked up to Blood Demon and said mockingly, "Blood General, 10 hits should be nothing to you." Blood Demon narrowed his eyes and said indifferently, "Qing Song, you talk a lot today." Qing Song's eyes turned cold. He said coldly, "Blood Demon, do you dare to make a bet with me?" Blood Demon raised his eyebrows and looked at Qing Song. "A bet?" "Yes. In this second round, we will compete based on the results. If I, Qing Song, win, I want you to hand over your dog to me. If I, Qing Song, lose, I will not fight for the position of Commander-in-Chief for you. On the contrary, I will help you win the position of Commander-in-Chief." Qing Song's voice wasn't soft, or it could be said that Qing Song deliberately raised his voice and pointed at Zhuan provocatively. Qing Song's words immediately attracted the attention of the surrounding generals. Even the guests on the Duga heard it clearly. In an instant, discussions broke out. Song Feng stood proudly not far from the blood cauldron. He naturally noticed Qing Song's challenge to Blood Demon, but he didn't step in to stop it. In an instant, countless gazes gathered on Qing Song and Blood Demon. Of course, there were also many gazes that fell on Zhuan beside Blood Demon. From Qing Song's words, everyone could see that Qing Song was targeting Blood Demon's helper Muzhua. Blood Demon frowned slightly and hesitated. Qing Song had knocked on the blood cauldron 10 times. In Blood Demon's eyes, such a result was extremely amazing. Even though Blood Demon was quite confident in himself, he wasn't sure if he could knock on the blood cauldron 10 times. Thinking of this, Blood Demon looked at the calm young man beside him and couldn't help but ask, "Brother Mu, what do you think of this? If you feel that it's inappropriate, I'll reject it immediately." Qing Song frowned slightly. He didn't expect Blood Demon to consult Muzhua. Although Muzhua had some tricks up his sleeve, his cultivation was only at the Arcane Shattering Saint stage. He might be able to deal with a Sky Yin Saint stage expert, but he would definitely be unable to deal with a Sky Yang Saint stage expert. However, Blood Demon was so cautious with Muzhua, which made Qing Song feel strange. Even the other generals were surprised when they saw this scene. Zhuan stared at Qing Song indifferently and grinned. That smile looked rather cold as he said, "Since General Qing Song is so kind, I won't reject it. If you want to bet, I'll accompany you. However, the bet has to be changed. If you, Qing Song, win, I, Muzhua, will give my life to you and you can do whatever you want with it. If you, Qing Song, lose, I want one of your arms and help General Blood Demon ascend to the position of commander. How about it?" As soon as these words were spoken, the surroundings instantly fell into silence. Many people looked at Zhuan, who stood proudly with strange gazes. They were truly unable to imagine that this kid would actually agree to Qing Song's bet, and even shamelessly change the terms of the bet. Qing Song stared at Zhuan and pondered for a while before nodding. "Okay. I, Qing Song, accept this bet. Then I hope General Qing Song won't deny it when you lose," Zhuan said indifferently. Qing Song sneered. "Don't worry, I won't deny it. However, I think you should be more concerned about your life. You only have a short period of time to live. General Qing Song doesn't need to worry about that. I, Muzhua, will live well," Zhuan said and no longer paid attention to Qing Song. Qing Song narrowed his eyes and sneered as he crossed his arms and looked at the blood cauldron. At this moment, Qing Song's helper went up. Qing Song's helper was an ugly old man with pustules all over his face. This old man wasn't weak as he actually knocked on the blood cauldron 8 times. Chapter 1626. Stonebreaker's entrance after Azure Firmament. Other generals stepped onto the stage. However, most of them were disheveled. They weren't able to ring the blood cauldron 5 times, and were sadly eliminated. And the ones that everyone paid attention to were Yao Lian and Demonshine. Demonshine's result was quite good, ringing the blood cauldron 8 times. As for Demonshine's helper, he also managed to ring the blood cauldron 8 times. As for Yao Lian's result, many people's eyes brightened. His final result was a total of 9 rings. Moreover, these 9 rings weren't from Yao Lian himself, but from his helper. As for Yao Lian himself, he had only managed to ring the blood cauldron 8 times, the same as Demonshine. However, his helper was extraordinary. He had actually managed to ring the blood cauldron 9 times. Zhuowen's eyes fell on Yao Lian's helper. This helper was extremely short and his entire body was covered in a black robe, making it impossible to see his true appearance. However, Zhuowen could feel that this short man wasn't simple at all. If he wasn't wrong, then this short man should have been holding back a certain amount of his strength just now. Stonebreaker stepped forward. After Yao Lian's helper retreated, Song Feng shouted out in a loud voice, while Shirlai's name completely attracted the attention of countless people. Even the first commander, who had his eyes closed, slowly opened them at this moment. His eyes shined like torches as they focused on Stonebreaker. First commander, how many times do you think Stonebreaker will be able to ring the blood cauldron? The second commander sitting beside the first commander suddenly asked. The other 4 commanders seated on the high seats also looked at the first commander. As commanders, they were naturally well aware of the talent and strength of the first general, Shirlai. With the strength that Stonebreaker has displayed over the years, the truth is that he already has the qualifications to be promoted to commander. It's just that the blood refining mansion can only have 8 commanders, and this has never changed since time immemorial. In addition, Stonebreaker has never taken the initiative to challenge a commander, thus he has always been a general. The other commanders also began to whisper amongst themselves. Their evaluation of Stonebreaker was quite high. At the same time, this was the first time that 6 commanders were discussing a single general. From this, it could be seen just how important Stonebreaker was in the hearts of these commanders. The first commander's eyes were calm, like an ancient well without any ripples. He looked at Stonebreaker and pondered for a moment, then said in a hoarse voice, "If Stonebreaker uses all his strength, he might be able to ring the blood cauldron 15 times." After saying this, the first commander narrowed his eyes once more. The other 5 commanders looked at each other in shock. They knew the temperament of the first commander. He was extremely cold and indifferent. Even in front of the mansion master, the first commander would not show any other expression. Was Stonebreaker's? Was Stonebreaker? Stonebreaker was Stonebreaker? Dressed in rock armor, Rockbreak slowly stood up and walked onto the plaza step by step. His gait was like a dragon or a tiger. His footsteps seemed to follow a strange rhythm that made one's heart beat faster. When Shirlai finally stood in front of the blood cauldron, countless gazes gathered on his figure. Even Song Feng's eyes sparkled as he stared at Shirlai, a look of admiration on his face. Stonecrack, I wonder how many times he can attack. Qing Song furrowed his brows, feeling uncertain. His results were the best so far, but he knew that if Stonebreaker made a move, his results would be surpassed. This was because Stonebreaker was the first general. Qing Song had been a general for almost 1,000 years. However, in the past 1,000 years, he had never had the courage to challenge Stonebreaker. He didn't even have the courage to fight for the title of first general. This was because the Stonebreaker in front of him was too powerful. He was so powerful that he didn't dare to challenge him. Let's begin. Song Feng's eyes lit up. He took a few steps back and gestured to Stonebreaker. This was the first time Song Feng had treated a general so politely. However, the others didn't feel anything wrong. This was because Stonebreaker was indeed very powerful. He was so powerful that even Song Feng didn't dare to underestimate him. Not only was Stonebreaker at the Sky Saint stage, but it was also said that Stonebreaker's battle prowess was exceptionally terrifying. Stonebreaker had once challenged Song Feng. It was said that during that battle, Stonebreaker had fought Song Feng for 100 rounds and lost in the end. However, Stonebreaker's defeat was glorious. He had challenged Song Feng, who was a Sky Saint stage expert. Not only did he not lose instantly, but he had fought Song Feng for 100 rounds before losing. He was definitely a monstrous existence. It was this battle that had established Stonebreaker's reputation as the first general. This was also the reason why Qing Song didn't dare to challenge Stonebreaker. It was also the reason why Song Feng treated Stonebreaker so politely. Stonebreaker nodded. He took a step forward and threw out a punch. This punch was ordinary, but it brought with it a terrifying howling wind. However, when the punch approached the blood cauldron, it was as if he was hammering a pile. He quickly struck the cauldron. Bang, 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 bang. Suddenly, the sound of 4 cauldrons rang out clearly. 4 waves of pressure soared into the sky and came crashing down. Crack. A wave of air whizzed out in all directions like an angry dragon. The ground of the square, with the blood cauldron as the center, began to crack. The dense rocks seemed to have lost their gravity as they floated into the air. Nearly a third of the square had been turned into ruins under the pressure of this pressure. Stonebreaker stood in front of the blood cauldron like a long spear. As the pressure descended, his long hair and sleeves danced in the wind. However, Stonebreaker was as steady as Mount Tai. 4 cauldrons at the same time, but he still withstood the pressure of the 4 cauldrons. This Stonebreaker is really arrogant, but he has the right to be arrogant. When the pressure of the 4 cauldrons had destroyed 1/3 of the square, countless people around the square stood up in shock. Stonebreaker lived up to his name as the first general. He had shocked everyone with his first move. The 4 cauldrons were much more amazing than Qing Song's 3 cauldrons. Moreover, under the pressure of the 4 cauldrons, Stonebreaker was as steady as Mount Tai. This made many people look at him in a new light. 4 cauldrons at the same time. Qing Song's body trembled as he stared at Stonebreaker. He took a deep breath, but his heart couldn't calm down for a long time. Is this Stonebreaker? Blood Demon had a complicated look in his eyes. If it was Qing Song, he might be able to compete with him. However, Stonebreaker was like an insurmountable mountain. Blood Demon didn't have the courage to compete with him. Zhuowen stood tall. His eyes weren't on Stonebreaker, but on the blood cauldron and the cauldron's cauldron sounds. From the beginning, he had noticed the difference in the cauldron's cauldron sounds. He could vaguely feel that the cauldron's cauldron sounds contained pain, anger, resentment, and other emotions. The pressure, blood qi, and resentment from the blood cauldron seemed to be the cauldron's way of venting these negative emotions. This cauldron has a spirit, and it contains emotions. It is venting its emotions? Zhuowen's eyes were blurred. He looked past Blood Demon, Vault Sheath Stonebreaker, and finally at the blood cauldron. He could feel the anger and helplessness in the cauldron's cauldron sounds. Blood Demon seemed to have noticed Zhuowen's strange behavior. He couldn't help but cast a sidelong glance at Zhuowen. His eyes revealed a pondering look. Qing Song also noticed Zhuowen. However, he sneered and thought disdainfully, "Looks like Mu Zhuo is scared stiff." However, after the 4 cauldron sounds gradually dissipated, Stonebreaker threw another punch. This time, his fist landed on the surface of the blood cauldron. He threw 3 consecutive punches. Instantly, the 3 cauldron sounds overlapped and blood qi shot up from the cauldron's mouth. This time, when the 3 cauldron sounds overlapped, it was like the echoes of an empty valley, resounding endlessly in everyone's ears. Many of the weaker cultivators could not help but cover their ears. Not long after the 3 cauldron sounds rang out, Shirlai's face was expressionless. His left fist, which had been waiting to strike, was thrown out once again. He actually threw out 3 punches in one go. In an instant, the blood cauldron was knocked 10 times. Crash. The cauldron sounds, blood qi, and resentment instantly gathered in the sky, forming an extremely terrifying pressure. These 3 forces continued to churn and converge. Finally, they formed a huge and terrifying blood dragon. The blood dragon roared at the sky. With a furious roar, it suddenly swooped down and swept toward Stonebreaker. Its bloody mouth was filled with the stench of blood, and it unceremoniously swallowed Stonebreaker whole. What a terrifying blood dragon. Stonebreaker is too arrogant. The first 3 cauldron sounds haven't dissipated, and he immediately hit the 83 cauldron sounds. It's really. This blood dragon has gathered the pressure, blood chi, and resentment of the blood cauldron. The energy it contains is extremely terrifying. Although Stonebreaker is strong, I'm afraid it won't be easy for him to take on this attack. The impact of the blood-red dragon was too great. Everyone could feel that if they were to face the blood-red dragon, they would die without a doubt. Hence, many warriors began to worry for Stonebreaker. After all, the blood dragon was too strong. Although Stonebreaker was strong, it wouldn't be easy for him to take on this blood dragon. Stonebreaker's gaze was as calm as water. He suddenly raised his right hand above his head, after which he clenched his fist and roared. Wind, thunder, rain, snow for mountains descend. After he finished speaking, 4 enormous illusory mountains came crushing down from the 4 directions around the rock crack. Among the 4 mountains, one was howling with wind, one was flashing with lightning, one was pouring with rain, and one was filled with snowflakes. The 4 mountains represented 4 different sceneries. At the instant the 4 mountains descended, a frightening sealing power erupted from the 4 mountains. The moment the Crimson Dragon rushed into the 4 mountains, the 4 energies of wind, thunder, rain, and snow suddenly exploded. Immediately, the Crimson Dragon stopped in mid-air. Stonebreaker didn't even look at the blood dragon. Soon after, he slowly walked towards the blood cauldron and said indifferently, "Explode!" Rumble. The blood-red dragon suddenly roared at the sky. Soon after, the 4 types of wind, lightning, rain, and snow energy around the blood-red dragon became extremely terrifying. Then, the blood-red dragon directly collapsed into nothingness. Chapter 1627. Blood Calamity Cloud. The blood-red dragon was eliminated just like that? The entire place was filled with shock. Many of the surrounding guests had fallen into a state of shock. The rock crack had struck out twice in a row. The 6 cauldron sounds had superimposed on each other, and the rock crack was as immovable as a mountain. Ching Tsong's face twitched as a look of defeat appeared in his eyes. Now he finally understood how big the gap between him and Stonelai was. Stonelai was like a boundless ocean that he could not see the end of. He could not even see where the end of the ocean was. Mansion Master Xue Hentian also revealed a rare smile. He looked at Shirlai with a satisfied gaze. Song Feng nodded as a gentle look appeared in his eyes. He knew that if Stonelai could withstand the backlash of the blood cauldron so easily, he might be able to break through to the 15th ring. Shirlai's gaze remained calm. In the sky above his head, there were 4 mountains of wind, thunder, rain, and snow. They were arranged in 4 different directions. A sealing power spread out from the 4 mountains. Bang! Stonelai raised his right hand and slammed it on the blood cauldron. The 11th cauldron sound rang out as a terrifying blood chi gushed out. This blood chi was filled with endless resentment as it turned into a huge blood-red storm. However, the sealing force of the 4 wind, thunder, rain, and snow mountains above Stonelai's head was too terrifying. As soon as the blood-red storm appeared, it was completely suppressed by the sealing force formed by the 4 mountains. Bang! Bang! The 12th and 13th cauldron sounds rang out. Unfortunately, the sealing force of the 4 wind, thunder, rain, and snow mountains was too strong. It forcefully suppressed the terrifying resentment and pressure of the 2 cauldron sounds. At this moment, everyone's eyes were focused on Stonelai. They were all waiting for him to ring the cauldron for the 15th time. They knew that if he could ring the cauldron for the 15th time, he would be recognized as a monstrous genius. It was a great honor in the blood-refining mansion. Stonelai is going to move. He's going to ring the cauldron for the 14th time. Someone cried out in surprise, attracting everyone's attention. Stonecrack did indeed move. He still threw out a punch, and this punch was still as ordinary as ever. Bang! At the instant the 14th chime resounded, the sound of the cauldron changed completely. It actually contained a strand of killing intent. A strand of killing intent. It was like a war drum that was struck in a million battlefields, and it carried blood and terror as it swept out towards the surroundings in a dense mass. The pressure produced by the cauldron sound was extremely terrifying. In an instant, the pressure was enveloped and the square was shaking violently. The square was even affected the generals who were standing at the edge of the square. At this moment everyone's heart. The cauldron sound was of the 13. The pressure was sound. And it was much more terrifying than the previous 13 cauldron sounds. Everyone felt that the 14th cauldron sound was even more terrifying and vast than the previous 13 cauldron sounds combined. It was as if a qualitative change had occurred. As for the originally calm stone crack, his expression finally changed. A grave expression surfaced in his eyes as he abruptly retreated. After taking one step back, he took another step back. Everyone was in an uproar when they saw Shirlai retreat. Instantly, this was the first time Shirlai had retreated. Moreover, he had retreated step by step. From this, it could be seen how terrifying the might of the 14th cauldron sound was. Rumble. The patterns on the surface of the blood cauldron emitted a bloody glow. A terrifying bloody aura, filled with resentment, soared into the sky. In an instant, the square was covered by a bloody cloud. Countless blood-colored lightning bolts were spreading within the blood-colored clouds. They were like countless blood-colored rays that intertwined with one another. Stonelai, whether you can ring the 15th cauldron will depend on whether you can pass the blood calamity cloud. The first commander slowly opened his eyes. Dense light shone from his eyes as he stared at the huge blood-red cloud that was 100 kilometers wide. He murmured softly, "That's right." As the first commander, who had experienced the blood cauldron, he knew that there was a threshold for the 5th, 10th, 15th and 20th cauldron sounds. As long as one passed this threshold, one would be able to ring the corresponding number of cauldron sounds. The threshold for the 15th cauldron sound was within the 14th cauldron sound. He knew that as long as Stonelai passed the threshold of the blood calamity cloud, he would be able to ring the 15th cauldron sound. The first commander was not the only one. Mansion Master Xue Hentian, who was seated in the highest position, also stared at the enormous blood cloud. A dazed expression appeared on his face as he softly muttered, "It's the blood calamity cloud." He actually attracted the blood calamity cloud. Stonelai is really monstrous. Song Feng, who was closest to the blood calamity cloud, was shocked when he sensed the terrifying bloody cloud. He could not help but retreat to the edge of the square. Although his cultivation had reached the heaven-defying saint stage, his cultivation was actually not that high because Xue Hentian had forcibly raised his cultivation from the peak of the sky saint stage. Therefore, although Tsongfeng's cultivation was at the heaven-defying saint stage, his strength was much weaker than an ordinary heaven-defying saint stage expert. However, he was much stronger than a sky saint stage expert. Song Feng had tried the blood cauldron before, but he did not manage to ring the 14th cauldron. He also did not attract the blood calamity cloud. However, he knew that the person who could attract the blood calamity cloud was definitely a monstrous existence. Stonelai, who had attracted the blood calamity cloud, was undoubtedly the center of attention. Everyone wanted to know if Tsongfeng could pass the blood calamity cloud and ring the 15th cauldron. Rumble. A bloody lightning bolt spread out from the clouds. It was as thin as a finger, but the pressure it contained made everyone tremble with fear. The bloody lightning bolt was extremely fast. It tore through the void and instantly arrived above Stonelai. Stonelai did not dare to be careless. He took a step forward and waved his right hand. Immediately, the 4 mountains of wind, thunder, rain, and snow rose up to meet the bloody lightning bolts fearlessly. Boom! The bloody lightning bolts were like sharp swords as they struck the 4 mountains of wind, thunder, rain and snow. Then, countless bloody lightning bolts slithered across the surface of the 4 mountains like snakes. Stonelai's eyes narrowed slightly, because the bloody lightning bolts had spread to his entire body in an instant. Crack! In just an instant, the incomparably hard stone armor on Shirlai's body actually collapsed with a loud bang, shattering into countless pieces. Stonelai groaned as his long hair fluttered in the wind. He exerted a force with his right hand. Immediately, the 4 mountains' 4 energies exploded and gathered around Stonelai. In the end, they turned into 4 barriers of wind, thunder, rain, and snow that barely blocked the bloody lightning bolts. Isn't this bloody lightning too terrifying? Stonelai's stone armor crumbled instantly. That is the armor that General Stonelai forged from the hardest rock in the depths of the earth. Many generals' eyes flickered with shock. They knew the origin of Stone Lai's stone armor. It was definitely the hardest armor among all the generals' armors. However, the hardest armor had crumbled into countless pieces under the bloody lightning bolts. This was beyond the expectations of all the generals. Boom, boom, boom. The bloody cloud suddenly spun. Immediately, 3 bloody lightning bolts shot out and landed on the 4 mountains. The terrifying blood-red lightning completely destroyed the seal formed by the 4 mountains. Cracks appeared on the surface of the 4 mountains, as if they would collapse at any moment. Rumble. Immediately after the 3 bloody lightning bolts, another 3 bloody lightning bolts descended. At this moment, the cracks on the 4 mountains grew larger and larger. Stone Lai spat out a mouthful of blood as his face turned pale. Rumble. Before Stone Lai could even catch his breath, the center of the bloody cloud whirlpool became even more intense. 7 bloody lightning bolts descended in an instant. The number was twice as many as the previous 2. At this moment, Stone Lai's expression changed drastically. The first 7 bloody lightning bolts had already exhausted him. Now another 7 bloody lightning bolts descended. Wasn't this a death sentence for him? Stone Lai roared furiously. With a flick of his finger, he took out a stone plate from his spirit ring. He stepped on the stone plate and disappeared as if he had teleported. Boom, 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 boom. The moment the rocks disappeared, the 7 bolts of blood-red lightning arrived as expected. They landed on the 4 mountains, and in the end, the 4 mountains were unable to endure the bombardment of the blood-red lightning. In the end, they collapsed inch by inch and turned into nothingness. Swoosh. After the 4 mountains crumbled, Stone Lai appeared at the edge of the square with a gloomy expression on his face. He lifted his head and stared at the swirling bloody cloud. His eyes were filled with fear. He never imagined that the blood cauldron would undergo such a qualitative change after the 14th ring. Even more so, he never imagined that the bloody lightning bolts descending from the bloody cloud would be so terrifying. In the end, I didn't manage to ring the 15th ring. What a pity. Stone Lai sighed in his heart. However, he wasn't discouraged because he knew that even if he didn't manage to ring the 15th ring, he would still be the champion of the 2nd stage. Looking at the other generals present, who could compete with him, even the 2nd general, Qing Song, was greatly inferior to him. Even Stone Lai didn't manage to ring the 15th ring. Looks like no one among the generals will be able to ring the 15th ring and become a monster. A trace of pity appeared in Song Feng's eyes. He knew that Stone Lai was only a hair away from being able to ring the 15th ring. However, the blood tribulation cloud was too terrifying. It wasn't something that an ordinary person could withstand. He didn't manage to ring the 15th ring? The first commander's eyes flickered as he shook his head. Soon after, he leaned back in his chair and narrowed his eyes. He no longer paid attention to the plaza. In the eyes of the first commander, the only person who could pique his interest in this commander battle was the first general Shi Lai. However, Shi Lai's final performance caused him to be somewhat disappointed. Hence, he decided to stop paying attention to him. The blood-refining mansion master, Shui Hentian, also returned to his seat with a trace of disappointment in his eyes. Stone Lai has rung the 14th ring. He advances. Song Feng regained his senses and announced in a clear voice. His announcement caused quite a commotion. Although Stone Lai didn't manage to ring the 15th ring as everyone expected, the 14th ring was still an extremely shocking result. Just think about it. Which general could ring the blood cauldron 14 times? After announcing Stone Lai's result, Song Feng wanted to let Stone Lai's helper go up the stage. However, Stone Lai waved his hand. With his result, his helper would never be able to surpass him. Hence, there was no need for his helper to go up the stage. Song Feng agreed. Soon after, his gaze landed on Shui Mo as he said in a loud voice, "Only the Blood General and your helper are left. Blood General, please step forward." Chapter 1628. Lackey the Blood Demon slowly stood up and stomped his right foot on the ground. Endless blood qi erupted from his body, and he instantly flew to the top of the blood cauldron like a bolt of crimson lightning. At this moment, The terrifying blood cloud in the sky completely dissipated the moment the rock cracked and retreated from the square. Qing Song sneered. He deliberately glanced at Zhuo Wen and said mockingly, "Remember our bet. After the blood general loses, you will be at my disposal. Then you will crawl over here and kneel in front of me." Zhuo Wen ignored Qing Song's sarcastic remarks. He stared at the blood cauldron and said indifferently, "Just prepare one of your hands." Qing Song's eyes narrowed and he said coldly, "Still putting on an act? I think you must be very nervous right now. I can tell you clearly that although the blood general's strength is not bad, there is still a gap between him and me. Therefore it is basically impossible for him to surpass me, let alone ring it 10 times. So you are dead. It is over." Zhuo Wen slowly turned his head and stared indifferently at Qing Song, who was blabbering on, and said indifferently, "Are you done talking now? You're chattering like a woman." Qing Song's face froze when he heard this. A terrifying murderous intent erupted from his eyes. He said coldly, "What did you say? Do you dare say it again?" Zhuo Wen sneered and said, "Since General Qing Song wants to hear it again, then this Mu will respectfully accept. Forgive this Mu for being blunt, but General Qing Song, you are chattering like a woman." Qing Song's eyes widened. He let out a furious roar and a terrifying aura slowly spread out from his body. This Mu Zhuo was too hateful. He dared to provoke him again and again. Now he even insulted him in front of everyone. How could he, Qing Song, be humiliated like this? The other generals around him all stared at Zhuo Wen strangely. They did not expect Mu Zhuo to provoke Qing Song at this juncture. In their eyes, this was not a wise move. What? Since General Qing Song is so angry, does this mean that you acknowledge my evaluation of you? After that, General Qing Song decided to take action and deal with this Mu. Zhuo Wen slowly turned his head, and his gaze finally landed on Qing Song. The corners of his mouth curled into a mocking smile. Qing Song took a deep breath and said gloomily, "Trash, are you trying to provoke me? Let me tell you, in my opinion, your plan is really childish and despicable. Moreover, you only have a short period of time to live, so I won't bicker with you." Qing Song coldly snorted as he spoke. He no longer bothered with Zhuo Wen. Instead, his eyes landed on the blood cauldron in the middle of the square. He clearly understood that if Blood Demon's result was worse than his, Blood Demon's life and death would be completely up to him. When the results of the Blood General test are out, I will let you have a taste of a fate worse than death. For now, I will let you have a good time. Qing Song thought to himself. Song Feng glanced at Blood Demon and said, "Blood General, let's begin." Blood Demon was not a person who would waste time. He cupped his fist and looked at the blood cauldron. He took a deep breath. Speaking of which, he felt some pressure to win against Qing Song. However, he did not want to lose Zhuo Wen as a helper. After all, if he lost his helper, he would not be able to participate in the last round of the commander's battle. He would have no chance of becoming the commander. If I also ring 10 times, then I will be on par with Qing Song. Then this bet will not count. Looks like this is the only way. Blood Demon's gaze became extremely sharp. He did not place any hope on Zhuo Wen. Perhaps Zhuo Wen's strength was not bad, but Blood Demon did not think that Zhuo Wen could be stronger than him. Therefore, in Blood Demon's opinion, since he could not surpass Qing Song, then Zhuo Wen was even more impossible. However, he did not understand why Zhuo Wen agreed to Qing Song's bet. It was not beneficial to them at all. Let's take it one step at a time. Blood Demon felt a little bitter in his heart. He took a step forward and threw out a punch. Blood Qi lingered in his fist. Bang bang bang. In an instant, Blood Demon threw out 3 consecutive strikes. The pressure from the 3 cauldron sounds descended. Blood Demon lowered his body slightly and completely neutralized the terrifying pressure. Bang bang. After the 3 cauldron sounds, Blood Demon threw out a second punch. He threw out 2 consecutive strikes on the cauldron. Instantly, a terrifying blood qi shot out from the mouth of the cauldron and soared into the sky like a terrifying blood pillar. The blood devil coldly snorted as he clenched his fists. All of a sudden, all the acupuncture points on his body opened, and a dense blood mist gushed out. This blood mist scattered around Zhuo Wen's body. turning into a blood barrier that forcibly blocked the terrifying pressure of the fourth and fifth cauldron's sound waves. Break! The blood demon roared at the sky. The moment the pressure dissipated, his fists went against the flow and punched out 3 times in a row. Continuous banging sounds rang out, like the echoes of an empty valley, continuing without end. The blood chi became more and more intense. The pressure around the cauldron was terrifying to the extreme. When the pressure reached its peak, it formed a terrifying shockwave that charged towards Blood Demon like a sharp sword. Blood Demon's pupils shrank. He spread out his arms like a rock spreading its wings. Then he took a step forward and pushed out his open arms. A terrifying force blasted out with earth-shattering force. Rumble! When the shockwave arrived, it slammed into the Blood Demon. The Blood Demon let out a muffled groan as his attacks were shattered. The blood-colored barrier around him began to tremble, as if it could shatter at any moment. Ding ding ding! Blood Demon's pupils shrank. He retreated step by step. He did not expect the pressure to be so terrifying. This was only the 8th strike. Blood coagulation. The moment the blood-colored barrier shattered, the Blood Demon made a prompt decision. He clenched his right hand, and the surrounding blood chi immediately gathered in his palm like rivers flowing into the sea. In the end, it formed a blood-colored ball that kept spinning. Boom! Blood Demon pushed forward. The blood ball in his palm instantly bombarded the shockwave. Then he felt his right hand go numb. He could not help but take a few steps back before the shockwave was completely annihilated. Bloodseeker's breathing quickened and his face turned pale. The ball of blood in his right palm had shrunk to the point where it was almost insignificant. His right hand was trembling slightly. The shockwave just now had caused quite a bit of damage to him. The smile on Qing Song's face deepened when he saw Blood Demon's pathetic state. When he glanced at Zhuowen not far away to see if Muzhua was starting to feel nervous and afraid, he found that Muzhua was looking at everything calmly. It was as if nothing could move him. Still pretending to be calm? Qing Song whispered in disdain. Qing Song did not know why, but when he saw Muzhua's emotionless face, he felt a little unhappy. It seems that I can only summon the Blood Demon Phantom to fight. Blood Demon sighed and snorted coldly. He quickly formed a hand seal with both hands. Immediately, a blood magic array appeared on his chest. The magic array was only the size of a palm and did not look very eye-catching. However, the moment the blood-red formation appeared, the Blood Demon's aura suddenly became much stronger. Countless streams of blood-red chi spewed out and gathered behind the Blood Demon, forming a huge blood-red figure. Blood Demon descends. Blood Demon snorted coldly. He clenched his right hand and walked forward step by step. In an instant, he was in front of the blood cauldron. He threw a punch. The huge Blood Shadow's fist seemed to have merged with Blood Demon's fist, causing it to contain a powerful and terrifying force. Bang! The 9th sound of the cauldron rang out. The pressure of the blood cauldron was extremely terrifying. Then, a terrifying blood storm swept up around the blood cauldron. This blood storm was extremely terrifying. It instantly engulfed the blood shadow in the void behind Blood Demon, and completely annihilated it. What? How is this possible? Blood Demon spat out a mouthful of blood, and was directly sent flying. He did not expect the 9th strike to create such a terrifying blood storm. It actually crushed his Blood Demon Phantom. Blood Demon retreated to the edge of the square in a rather sorry state. Song Feng calmly said, "Blood General, 9th strike promotion." Blood Demon retreated to Zhuowen's side. His eyes were uncertain. He looked at Zhuowen and said in a low voice, "Brother Mu, things have developed to this point. Do as you see fit." As he spoke, Blood Demon waved his sleeve and distanced himself from Zhuowen. He leaned his back against a remote wall, his eyes filled with displeasure. Blood Demon knew that he had lost to Qing Song. This meant that Zhuowen would be punished by Qing Song, and he would be eliminated because he lost his helper. Without a doubt, Qing Song's bet was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Originally, Blood Demon had planned to refuse, but Zhuowen had agreed. That was why he had ended up like this. Haha. Brother Blood General, our bet still counts, right? So, your dog should be at my disposal now, right? Qing Song laughed and said to Blood Demon while pointing at Zhuowen. Blood Demon turned his head away and did not reply. However, from his clenched fists, one could see that Blood Demon was extremely displeased. Qing Tsang ignored Blood Demon's attitude and laughed wantonly. He then stared coldly at Zhuowen and said, Mu Zhuo, now you are at my disposal. Kneel on the ground, crawl over like a dog, and lick my shoes. If you want to be a dog, you have to be a good dog. Do you understand? As he spoke, Qing Tsang deliberately stretched out his right foot, his face filled with disdain. Many people around also had a look of ridicule. Everyone knew about the bet between Qing Tsang and Mu Zhuo. After all, Qing Tsang had said it very loudly at that time. Zhuowen's face was as calm as an ancient well. He first glanced at Blood Demon, who was sulking not far away, and then looked at Qing Tsang, who was full of self-satisfaction. Stomp! Zhuowen slowly took a step forward. However, this step was not toward Qing Tsang, but toward the blood cauldron. General Qing Tsang, I haven't made my move yet. The outcome of our bet is unknown. Why are you so anxious? Also, I have no interest in licking your dog's leg. If you want to enjoy the pleasure of licking my feet, why don't you put your leg near your mouth and lick it? Chapter 1629. 5 consecutive strikes. You? Just you? Are you kidding me? Qing Tsang said coldly. Many people around also revealed a strange expression, especially when they felt the fragmented profound Saint Realm aura from Zhuowen's body. The strange expression became even more intense. Although Mu Zhuo had shown great battle strength, he was still a shattering mystical realm expert. Even the blood general couldn't sound it 10 times. How could this kid do it? Zhuowen completely ignored Qing Tsang as he walked step by step towards the blood cauldron. His clear footsteps reverberated over the entire square, finally causing the absent-minded crowd to regain their senses. Are you kidding me? You can't sound the blood cauldron 10 times like this. Why are you wasting our time? Die. Qing Tsang's eyes were cold. He took a step forward and flew into the sky like an eagle. In an instant he arrived in front of Zhuowen. He pointed out the 5 fingers of his right hand, and a green energy gushed out like countless sword qi, rushing towards Zhuowen's vital points. Zhuowen's eyes turned cold. Just as he was about to make a move, a blood-red figure appeared in front of Qing Tsang and punched Qing Tsang's 5 fingers. Boom! There was an explosion. Qing Tsang's pupils shrank and he couldn't help but step back. The blood-red figure also took dozens of steps back. Blood General, what is the meaning of this? Do you want to break your promise? You should know that your result is worse than mine. Shouldn't you fulfill your end of the bet? Qing Tsang snorted and stared at the blood-red figure in front of him. It was none other than the angry Blood Demon. Blood Demon said coldly, Qing Tsang, aren't you being too hasty? My final results have not been completely determined yet. Brother Mu is my helper. My results can only be determined after he has tested me. Haha, ridiculous. Blood General, you've really fallen. You actually put your hope on this trash. I really have a whole new level of respect for you. Qing Tsang sneered coldly. Blood Demon's eyes were cold, but he didn't look at Qing Tsang. Instead, he stared at Song Feng and said, Sir, Qing Tsang wants to break the rules. I think you should do something about it. Song Feng glanced at Blood Demon, then at Qing Tsang and finally at Zhuowen. He smiled faintly. Since your helper wants to try, then let him try. But I think you know how terrifying the power of the blood cauldron is. If your helper can't handle it and dies, don't blame me for not warning you. Don't worry, manager. I won't die yet. Zhuowen replied coldly. Then come. Song Feng said. Zhuowen's eyes, blood cauldrons. It's just a futile effort. Qing Tsang snorted and retreated to the edge of the square. Blood Demon looked at Zhuowen with a complicated gaze. He sighed helplessly. Although he still had a glimmer of hope for Zhuowen, his rationality told him that it was impossible for Zhuowen to ring the cauldron 10 times or more. However, Blood Demon didn't want to admit defeat so easily, so he still put his hope on Zhuowen. When Zhuowen arrived in front of the blood cauldron, the crowd booed. Some even laughed as if they were watching a joke. Am I seeing things? This fragmented saint kid really wants to try the blood cauldron? Isn't he overestimating himself? He's like an ant trying to shake a tree. Is there something wrong with his head? The 6 great commanders and palace master Xue Hentian sitting in the high seats closed their eyes. They didn't want to pay attention to a fragmented saint kid. Zhuo Wen coldly looked at the surrounding people's mocking gazes and mocking voices. Suddenly, Zhuo Wen pointed a finger, and 20 drops of yellow springs circled around him like 20 bolts of lightning. Bang! 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 The instant the finger landed on the blood cauldron, Zhuo Wen tapped it 5 times in a row. In an instant, 5 cauldron chimes reverberated around the square like a great bell, shocking everyone's eardrums. The moment the 5 cauldrons rang out, the laughter in the surroundings came to an abrupt halt. Everyone stood up abruptly and stared at the slender figure in front of the blood cauldron. Shi Lai, who was resting in the corner with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes when the 5 cauldron sounds resounded. A ray of dazzling light shot out from his eyes. Is this guy crazy? Shi Lai finally spat out these words as he stared at Zhuo Wen's back. Even he had only tapped it 4 times at the beginning. The pressure from the 4 simultaneous chimes was just within the range that he could withstand. If it had been 5 simultaneous chimes, Shi Lai knew very well that he might have been able to withstand the pressure, but he might have been injured. However, the person in front of him was only at the fragmented profound saint realm, but he had already knocked 5 times in a row. Not to mention a fragmented profound saint. Even a saint at the heavenly Yin saint realm would be annihilated by the pressure. A Sky Yang saint wouldn't die, but he would definitely be seriously injured. Qing Tsang was also stunned, but he soon took pleasure in Shi Lai's misfortune. Blood General, it looks like your helper is asking for death. The pressure from the 5 simultaneous chimes is very strong. He's dead for sure. The blood demon's brows furrowed tightly. He couldn't understand Zhuo Wen anymore. He really couldn't figure out why Zhuo Wen had tapped it 5 times at the beginning. Under the mocking gazes of the crowd, the pressure of the 5 cries came crashing down like an angry dragon. In an instant, the square trembled violently and a huge crack appeared, like a terrifying gully. Whoosh! The formless ripples spread out in all directions at a rapid speed. Even the generals at the edge of the square were affected, which showed how terrifying the pressure was. Zhuo Wen stood proudly, his black robes fluttering in the wind. He raised his head and felt the pressure coming closer and closer. He suddenly pointed a finger, and 20 drops of yellow spring gathered at his fingertip and rose up. Rumble! As the pressure descended, Zhuo Wen felt his shoulders sink and his knees bend slightly. He could clearly feel the 20 drops of yellow spring quickly dispersing drop by drop. Under the pressure, 12 drops were dispersing, leaving only 8 drops of yellow spring. The yellow spring contained the meaning of life and death. It could lead to life or death. When Zhuo Wen took out the 20 drops of yellow spring, he injected the meaning of life into his body, connecting his vitality with the yellow spring. If the 20 drops of yellow spring were not dispersing, then Zhuo Wen's vitality would not be extinguished. The result was indeed so. The pressure from the 5 simultaneous chimes only dispersing the 12 drops of yellow spring, allowing Zhuo Wen to completely withstand the pressure. As the pressure dissipated, Zhuo Wen keenly sensed that the 12 drops of yellow springs that had been destroyed had once again condensed under the meaning of the cycle of life and death. The slaughtering finger of yellow spring is really terrifying. Although it's not very powerful now, its characteristics are really terrifying. The 20 drops of yellow springs have fused with your life force. If the 20 drops of yellow springs do not disperse in one strike, then you will be unharmed. Only by completely dispersing the 20 drops of yellow springs in one strike can the external force completely attack your body. In Mu Chen's Sea of Consciousness, Xiao Hei's exclamation rang out. At this moment, even Xiao Hei could not help but admire the terror and extraordinariness of the slaughtering finger of yellow spring. If the amount of yellow spring you gather in the future really reaches a terrifying level, I'm afraid that even celestial saint experts may not be able to kill you. Zhuo Wen's immortal technique is really terrifying. Hearing Xiao Hei's exclamation, Zhuo Wen also realized the power of the slaughtering finger of yellow spring. He could not help but feel joy and excitement in his heart. He withstood it? He actually withstood the pressure of the 5 simultaneous chimes. When the pressure slowly dissipated, the scene of Mu Zhuo being crushed to death did not happen. Instead, Muzhua was still standing in the same place, seemingly unharmed. How is this possible? Qing Song suddenly stood up. His eyes were filled with shock. The blood devil also stood up, but his eyes were filled with excitement. Shi Lai's emotionless eyes also revealed a trace of emotion. He stared at Zhuo Wen's figure and slowly furrowed his brows. He also couldn't figure out how this puny fragmented profound Saint Realm martial artist was able to resist that terrifying pressure. The first 5 chimes only dispersed 12 drops of yellow spring. Now let me see how many drops of yellow spring can be dispersed by the next 5 chimes. Zhuo Wen's heart was filled with pride. He wanted to see how strong the defense of the 20 drops of yellow spring was. Thinking of this, Zhuo Wen pointed his finger towards the surface of the blood cauldron. Then he quickly pointed 5 times. Another 5 chimes of the cauldron were like the roars of angry dragons, resounding in the square. An ancient pressure spread out, as if it could shake the heavens and the earth. Tung tung tung. At this moment, all the surrounding warriors stood up. Even Shi Lai stood up. Their gazes were filled with disbelief as they stared at the slender figure standing in front of the blood cauldron. Their eyes were filled with disdain and shock. Another 5 chimes. Xue Hentian and the first commander opened their eyes at the same time. Their sharp gazes shone brightly as they focused on Zhuo Wen. Song Feng took a few steps back, his eyes filled with shock. The first 5 chimes were enough to shock him, but the last 5 chimes were also repeated. This was the first time Song Feng had seen such a thing. Is this guy a freak? He actually knocked 5 times in a row. This pressure is much more terrifying than the previous 5 chimes. Song Feng said coldly in his heart. Crash. Another 5 chimes resounded. The blood cauldron trembled violently. Invisible ripples spread out from the ground, causing the ground of the square to collapse. Countless gravel suddenly floated up into the air. At the mouth of the blood cauldron, blood qi and resentment gushed out like a volcanic eruption. The dense blood qi and resentment caused the hearts of the surrounding people to tremble. They could all feel that if they were to be in the midst of such terrifying blood qi and resentment, they would definitely die. I wonder how this kid will be able to withstand this pressure and resentment. Chapter 1630. I want one of your arms. Qing Song's expression was the ugliest. He did not expect Muzhua to strike the cauldron 5 times consecutively. Even though Muzhua could not withstand the pressure and was forced to retreat, he still managed to strike the cauldron 10 times, which was a tie with him. Since they were tied, the bet between him and Blood Demon was voided. This bastard better die under this pressure. Qing Song secretly cursed. On the other hand, Blood Demon was pleasantly surprised. He hadn't expected Zhuo Wen to be able to ring the bell 10 times. At the same time, he was worried that Zhuo Wen might not be able to withstand the terrifying pressure and resentment. Roar. The sound of the cauldron, the bloody aura, and the resentment instantly gathered in the sky, forming a terrifying pressure. These 3 forces continued to churn and converge, finally forming a huge and terrifying blood-red dragon. The blood-red dragon roared towards the sky. With a furious roar, it suddenly swooped down towards Zhuo Wen. Its bloody mouth was filled with the stench of blood, and it unceremoniously swallowed Zhuo Wen whole. A blood-red dragon has indeed appeared. However, this blood-red dragon is even more terrifying than the one Shi Lai encountered previously. I'm afraid it has something to do with the fact that he struck the cauldron 5 times consecutively. When the blood-red dragon appeared, the surrounding people were not surprised. After all, the blood-red dragon had also appeared after Shi Lai struck the cauldron 10 times consecutively. Zhuo Wen stood proudly on the spot. He slowly lifted his head, revealing a trace of madness in his eyes. He softly muttered, "The resentment within this blood-red dragon is even greater than the blood-red storm. If I devour all of the resentment, the number of Yellow Spring's water droplets will increase again." Feeling the terror of the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs, Zhuo Wen was even more eager to increase the number of Yellow Spring's water droplets. He knew that the more Yellow Springs water droplets there were, the more powerful the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs would be. However, Zhuo Wen did not dare to be careless. The blood-red dragon's terrifying pressure made even him tremble in fear. Hence he did not dare to face it head-on. Explosive step. Without hesitation, Zhuowen took a step into the void and an explosion sounded under his feet. Then, the moment the blood dragon landed, he immediately jumped up and dodged the blood dragon's dive. Rumble. The blood dragon was caught off guard and directly fell to the ground of the square. In an instant, a huge pit that was dozens of meters wide was formed in the center of the square, and even more terrifying cracks appeared around the square. The originally awe-inspiring blood refinement plaza had been completely turned into ruins. It was beyond recognition. Zhuowen leaped up and advanced instead of retreating. He took a step in the air and instantly flashed to the blood dragon's back. The blood dragon was formed from 3 types of energy: resentment, blood energy, and pressure. However, the moment Zhuowen reached the back of the blood dragon, the 3 types of energy attacked Zhuowen. Zhuowen was surrounded by void laws. At the same time, 10 drops of yellow springs formed a defense. The other 10 drops shot out and drilled into the blood dragon's body. They began to madly absorb the resentment in the blood dragon's body. Rumble. Although the resentment was absorbed, the blood energy and pressure could not be absorbed. Zhuowen could not help but take a few steps back with a groan. Roar. At this moment, the blood dragon roared angrily. The dragon twisted its head and opened its mouth to bite Zhuowen, who was on its back. Zhuowen's eyes turned cold, but he was not afraid. He took a step forward and used the explosive step. His speed soared to the extreme, and he instantly dodged the blood dragon's attack. In order to increase the speed of the netherworld suction, Zhuowen injected the remaining 10 drops of netherworld into the blood dragon's body. As for Zhuowen, he dodged the blood dragon's attacks with the augmentation of explosive steps and void laws. After 20 breaths of time, the blood dragon suddenly roared. Its power began to shrink and its speed became a little sluggish. The corners of Zhuowen's mouth curled up slightly. He leaped up and jumped onto the blood dragon's back again. He placed his right hand on the surface of the blood dragon's back. Immediately, drops of yellow springs flew out of the blood dragon and into his palm. 40 drops of yellow springs. This blood dragon really has a lot of resentment. After collecting the last drop of yellow springs, Zhuowen's eyes flashed. He pointed his finger and 40 drops of yellow springs condensed on his fingertip. He then gently clasped them on the blood dragon's body. Ka ka ka. The blood dragon roared. Countless cracks appeared on its huge body, and it finally collapsed into countless blood-colored powder. Under the countless blood-colored powder, Zhuowen slowly landed on the blood cauldron. He took a deep breath and slowly calmed the boiling blood energy in his body. Although the battle with the blood dragon was extremely short, his mind was greatly exhausted. After all, this blood dragon was not ordinary. One wrong step would lead to all the mistakes. It was not so easy to deal with. Everyone was dumbfounded. Although they had seen how Shirlai had dealt with the blood dragon, who was Shirlai? He was the #1 general, a monstrous genius whose cultivation base had reached the Sky Saint realm. However, Muzhuo was only at the Shattering Mystery Saint realm. It was beyond everyone's expectations that he could deal with the blood dragon so easily. Zhuowen took a deep breath. Under everyone's gaze, he did not immediately ring the bell for the 11th time. Instead, he slowly turned around and looked in Qing Song's direction. He said loudly, "General Qing Song, do you still remember the bet between us?" As soon as he said that, everyone's eyes, which were originally focused on Zhuowen, instantly shifted to Qing Song. Everyone present knew about the bet between Qing Song and Muzhuo. At this moment, Muzhuo had already rung the bell for the 10th time. This result was the same as Qing Song's. As long as Muzhuo rung the bell again, Muzhuo would win the bet and Qing Song would lose. Qing Song's pupils shrank. His scalp was slightly numb, and he remained silent. Blood Demon laughed and said, "Qing Song, what's wrong? Are you going back on your word?" Qing Song took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "Aren't you guys celebrating too early? This kid hasn't rung the bell for the 11th time. The outcome hasn't been decided yet. Who knows if this kid is putting on an act now? Unless you ring the bell for the 11th time." Bang! Before Qing Song's voice fell, the earth-shattering sound of the cauldron rang again. The slender figure, who was standing in front of the blood cauldron, pointed his finger, and the 11th cauldron ring rang out. The boundless pressure swept across, causing his shoulder-length hair to flutter. He looked like a god or a demon. Zhuowen stared coldly at Qing Song and said, "The 11th time. According to our agreement, I want one of your arms." Although the pressure of the 11th strike was terrifying, Zhuowen had the 40 drops of yellow springs on him. He was able to completely block the terrifying pressure outside of the yellow springs, leaving Zhuowen unharmed. Moreover, the resentment from the 11th time was completely absorbed by the yellow spring, which increased Zhuowen's yellow spring by a lot. Zhuowen knew that with the protection of the yellow spring, he should be fine before the 15th cauldron ring. The 11th time, Qing Song has lost. Everyone sucked in a breath as they stared at the youth with fluttering hair. There was an indescribable emotion in their eyes. Qing Song took a step back, his heart was pounding. He couldn't believe it and shouted, "Impossible. You're just a fragmented profound saint. You must have cheated. Yes, you must have cheated." Zhuowen's eyes were cold. He pointed his finger again, and the 12th cauldron ring rang out. An even more terrifying pressure came crashing down, causing the square to collapse. "No. I don't believe it." Qing Song roared. He had almost lost his mind. He suddenly jumped up, and a green aura erupted from his body. He was like a raging dragon, and the direction he was heading towards was Zhuowen's direction. In Qing Song's view, this puny fragmented profound saint must have done something to the blood cauldron. Now he was going to expose Muzhua's true colors. Looking at Qing Song, who was rushing towards him, Zhuowen's eyes were incomparably cold. He faced the terrifying pressure, and his robe fluttered. Shortly after, he pointed his finger again. Bang! Bang! In the blink of an eye, he pointed his finger twice. The 13th and 14th cauldron rings exploded, causing the square to completely collapse. Countless rocks fell. In the vast square, only the area around the blood cauldron was intact. The rest of the square had formed a huge pit. Even manager Tsang Feng was forced to retreat to the edge of the square, and he looked at the scene in shock. When the 14th cauldron ring rang out, the cauldron's sound completely changed. It contained a wisp of killing intent, and it was like a war drum in a million battlefields. It was filled with blood and fear, and it spread out in all directions. The monstrous resentment and blood qi condensed into a huge blood cloud above the square. Countless blood lightning bolts intertwined within the blood cloud. Bang! Shirlai suddenly stood up, and he stared at the terrifying blood cloud. Soon after, his gaze fell on Zhuowen. His gaze had completely changed. He didn't expect that there would be someone other than him who could attract the blood tribulation cloud. Moreover, it was someone he had never expected. Where did this person come from? Shirlai couldn't help but murmur. The first commander and Xue Hentian couldn't help but stand up. Originally, the two of them didn't have any expectations. However, this little guy named Muzhua had aroused their expectations once again. At this moment, Qing Song, who was rushing towards the blood cauldron, was frozen in midair. He was complaining in his heart, and he was extremely terrified. The pressure of the 13th and 14th cauldron rings was so terrifying that Qing Song had never expected it. "General Qing Song, you forced me to do this." Zhuowen's gaze was cold. Not only did Qing Song break the agreement, he even wanted to kill Zhuowen. If he let such a person live, Zhuowen wouldn't be Zhuowen. When he thought of this, Zhuowen pointed his finger. A drop of yellow spring water shot towards Qing Song, who was frozen in midair like a bolt of lightning. This drop of yellow spring water was enough to take down Qing Song, who was currently suppressed by the pressure. "Humph! Do you still want to kill someone with a general position in front of me? You are too presumptuous." The moment the drop of yellow spring flew out, a cold snort was heard. Song Feng, who had rushed to the edge of the square, kicked out, and like a black lightning bolt, he instantly blocked Qing Song's path. Chapter 1631. 20 strikes. Zhuowen's gaze turned cold. He did not expect Song Feng to intervene. "Lord Song Feng should know about our bet, right? I only want one of Qing Song's arms, or else I won't let this go," Zhuowen said coldly. A cold glint flashed across Song Feng's eyes as he retorted, "You are truly impudent. You actually dare to retort in front of me? Previously, I had already let this matter slide out of consideration for the manor head. But now you intend to kill me. Do you really think that I don't exist? Zhuowen's expression turned ugly. He knew that Song Feng was deliberately making things difficult for him, and that attacking Qing Song was just an excuse. Lord Song Feng, you forced me to do this. Zhuowen's gaze was cold. He took a step forward, and the explosive footwork technique surged beneath his feet. With a rumble, Zhuowen appeared above Song Feng's head in an instant. He pointed a finger, and 50 drops of yellow springs flew out from his body, circling around his right arm and merging into his fingers. Good lad, you actually dare to attack me. I think you're simply courting death. Song Feng sneered. He pulled his right hand from behind his back, and immediately unsheathed his giant black spear. Then he twisted his right hand, and a black energy erupted from the tip of the giant black spear, shooting towards Zhuowen like lightning. Clang! The slaughtering finger of yellow springs collided with the giant black spear. Zhuowen felt a terrifying power spread from his fingers, and then, Zhuowen spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying. You overestimate yourself. The moment Zhuowen retreated, Song Feng wanted to chase after him, but he saw a mocking smile on Zhuowen's face. Immediately, a strong sense of danger rose in his mind. Rumble. Suddenly, a blood lightning bolt shot down from the blood clouds in the sky. This blood lightning bolt was heading straight for Song Feng. Damn it, this boy is plotting against me? The moment the blood lightning struck, Song Feng immediately understood what had happened. No wonder Muzhua had attacked him like an ant trying to shake a tree. It turned out that he was trying to attract the blood lightning from the blood clouds. However, there was no time for Song Feng to think too much about it. The blood lightning was extremely terrifying, and even he did not dare to underestimate it. Chop iron. Holding the spear in his right hand, Song Feng pinched the sword fingers of his left hand and rubbed them across the surface of the giant black spear. Instantly, a scorching black glow burst forth from the giant black spear. This black glow was akin to a black tornado as it covered the surface of the spear. Whoosh! Whoosh! Then, Song Feng swung his right hand, and the black spear was flung out. Instantly, a terrifying black hurricane soared into the sky. It swept through the sky and earth, and met the blood lightning head-on. The blood lightning was still as thick as a finger and looked insignificant. However, after seeing the battle between Stonebreak and the blood lightning, no one dared to underestimate the power of this tiny blood lightning. Whoosh! The blood lightning landed on the black hurricane. Immediately, countless streaks of blood-red lightning spread throughout the hurricane, annihilating the black hurricane. Then, without losing any momentum, the blood lightning swept towards Song Feng. Song Feng's pupils shrank. He grabbed Qing Song's collar with his left hand and threw him to the edge of the square. Carrying Qing Song would greatly affect his strength, so he was busy dealing with the blood lightning. Naturally, he would not bring Qing Song with him. However, the moment Qing Song was thrown out, a yellow glow flashed past Song Feng's body and quickly disappeared between Qing Song's eyebrows. Ah! A scream rang out. Qing Song's face contorted, and he roared into the sky as if he was enduring some kind of pain. Then his body began to shrivel at a speed visible to the naked eye. Finally, he became a dried corpse and fell into the ruins of the square. The moment Qing Song turned into a dried corpse, 3 yellow spring water droplets flew out from his body and shot towards Zhuowen. This kid is good at scheming. The first commander's eyes flashed as he could not help but praise. However, the first commander's unprecedented praise shocked the other 5 commanders. They knew that the first commander rarely took the initiative to praise others. Even the first General Shirlai had never been praised by him. However, it was the first time that the first commander had taken the initiative to praise Muzhua, who was only at the fragmented profound Saint realm. Of course, Muzhua's scheming and foresight were indeed accurate and ruthless. Even the 5 commanders admired him. As for Qing Song's death, the 6 commanders did not take it to heart. They knew what was right and wrong. Moreover, it was true that Qing Song had set up the bet and broken it in front of everyone. Moreover, he had shamelessly tried to kill Muzhua. The 6 commanders disdained such a despicable act. Naturally, they did not feel anything about Qing Song's death. The reason why Song Feng was so unforgiving was because of his own selfishness. Previously, Zhuowen had disobeyed Song Feng, and Song Feng was a vengeful person. Naturally, he would not let go of any opportunity to obstruct Zhuowen. This little bastard. Song Feng's eyes were red. However, the blood lightning was extremely difficult to deal with. After hesitating for a while, Song Feng finally jumped out of the range of the blood cauldron. The blood lightning is extremely terrifying. Even Shirlai could not resist it, let alone this kid. This kid will either die under the blood lightning, or leave the blood cauldron to the edge of the square. Once he retreats to the edge of the square, he will not be able to escape. Song Feng landed at the edge of the square, and stared coldly at the figure under the blood cloud. There should be 14 blood lightning, which coincides with the 14th sound of the cauldron. However, this blood lightning is truly terrifying. If I want to resist it, I will have to use my sage body. Otherwise, it will be difficult to resist with my own strength. Zhuowen frowned slightly as he stared at the blood clouds in the sky. After the first blood lightning bolt was blocked by Song Feng, he knew that there were still 13 more. This was not something his body could withstand. Kid, you still have 2 golden thunder bamboos on you. Take them out. The golden thunder bamboo is the nemesis of all lightning. It can absorb any kind of lightning. Suddenly, Xiaohei's voice sounded in his sea of consciousness. Zhuowen's eyes lit up. With a flick of his finger, he took out 2 golden thunder bamboos that had dimmed. The golden thunder bamboos in these 2 golden thunder bamboos had been absorbed by Zhuowen. That was why they looked so dim. Of course, if he wanted to produce more golden thunder bamboos, it would probably take 100 years. Will it really work? Zhuowen muttered to himself with uncertainty. Boom. While Zhuowen was hesitating, the blood cloud sent down 3 more blood lightning. They instantly arrived above Zhuowen. Zhuowen gritted his teeth and lifted the 2 golden thunder bamboos to meet them. At the same time, more than 50 underworld water droplets surrounded his body as a precaution. Whoosh. The moment the blood lightning landed on the golden thunder bamboos, Zhuowen was shocked to find that the 3 blood lightning were absorbed by the golden thunder bamboos and disappeared in front of him. This scene was too strange. Everyone in the surroundings had an incredulous expression on their faces. Shirlai's pupils unconsciously shrank. His attention quickly fell on the 2 golden thunder bamboos in Zhuowen's hands. He whispered, "What is the origin of the 2 golden thunder bamboos in Muzhua's hands? They can absorb the blood lightning?" Not only Shirlai, but Xue Hentian and the 6 great commanders were also surprised. Boom. Next, more blood lightning came down from the blood cloud. However, they were all absorbed by the golden thunder bamboos. Zhuowen also successfully passed through the blood calamity cloud. After absorbing 13 blood lightning, Zhuowen found that the surface of the golden thunder bamboos was faintly blood red. Waves of blood lightning continued to spread out. It looked quite strange. Perhaps the blood lightning has some benefits for the cultivation of a great success divine body. Of course, with the power of the blood lightning, it can also be used as an attack. Zhuowen put away the 2 golden thunder bamboos. He had personally experienced how terrifying the power of the blood lightning was. 1 blood lightning was enough to make Song Feng, a heaven-defying divine realm expert, embarrassed. If 13 blood lightning were to come together, Song Feng would not dare to fight. This guy. Song Feng's pupils shrank as he muttered hatefully. Xue Mo stared at Zhuowen with a complicated look. The corner of his mouth revealed a trace of bitterness. Is this guy going to ring the 15th time? Everyone's breathing quickened as they watched Zhuowen's next move. Just when everyone thought that Zhuowen would ring the 15th time, Zhuowen slowly stretched out his right hand and gently stroked the patterns on the surface of the blood cauldron. His eyes became extremely focused as he quietly stared at the patterns on the surface of the blood cauldron. After a long while, Zhuowen whispered, "You are sick, so you are venting your dissatisfaction? I can cure your illness. As long as you let me ring the bell 20 times and take me into the blood-refining divine pond." Zhuowen's voice was so soft that no one could hear it. Although the blood cauldron in front of him was an ordinary cauldron, Zhuowen knew that after countless years of sacrifices, this cauldron already had a spirit and its own emotions. Zhuowen had already observed this cauldron a long time ago. He found that this cauldron was venting. Every time it vented, it would vent endless resentment. Without a doubt, this cauldron's problem was resentment. Zhuowen's slaughtering finger of the netherworld was the nemesis of resentment. He knew very well that the slaughtering finger of the netherworld could completely disperse the accumulated resentment in the blood cauldron. The blood cauldron was silent for a moment. Suddenly, the patterns on its surface surged with a blazing light. A terrifying aura surged out, causing Zhuowen to involuntarily take a few steps back. However, this aura came and went quickly. Soon it disappeared without a trace. Zhuowen's eyes focused and revealed a hint of joy. He knew that the blood cauldron had agreed. The aura just now was a hint. Don't worry. I will do my best to help you get rid of your resentment. Zhuowen took a deep breath and tapped the cauldron for the 15th time. Suddenly, the sound of the cauldron resounded. Then, Zhuowen was pleasantly surprised to find that the blood cauldron no longer emitted pressure and blood qi. Instead, it was spewing out endless resentment. Since you agree, let's do it all at once. Zhuowen laughed and tapped the cauldron again. In an instant, he tapped the cauldron 5 times in a row. Bang, bang, bang. 5 cauldron sounds rang out one after another. It was like a great bell, like the echoes of an empty valley, like a thunderbolt. It was endless and rumbling. In an instant, everyone stood up. Whether it was the guests, the generals, the 6 great commanders, or Mansion Master Xue Hentian, their actions were surprisingly consistent. They all stood up one after another. Their eyes were filled with disbelief as they listened to the terrifying sounds and the slender figure whose robes fluttered under the sounds. Chapter 1632. Resentment Cloud 220 times? How did he do it? Everyone stood up and stared at Zhuowen. Their faces twitched violently. The only person who could ring the blood cauldron 20 times was Mansion Master Xue Hentian. It was said that Xue Hentian had relied on the power of the 9 Sun Dao sword to achieve this. However, Mujua's cultivation base was only at the fragmented Profound Saint realm, and he had no official position in the Blood Refinement Mansion. He was also a nobody, but he had managed to ring the blood cauldron 20 times. 20 times? Impossible. I don't believe it. Shirlai's body trembled as he clenched his fists tightly. He stared at Zhuowen's figure and let out an inhuman roar. Although he felt regretful that he had not been able to ring the 15th time, he knew that the 14th time was a feat that all generals could only look up to. Other than him, no one else could achieve this result. However, Mujua, who had been a nobody, had not only caught up with him but even surpassed him. He had even managed to ring the 14th time. Shirlai could not accept such a turn of events. In other words, he could not believe it. However, even if he could not believe it, it had already happened in front of his eyes. Crash. The moment Zhuowen struck the cauldron for the 20th time, all the resentment in the blood cauldron poured out. The massive amount of resentment spewed out like an ocean, rushing into the sky and forming an endless dark cloud. If one took a closer look, one would realize that there were countless ferocious faces in the dark cloud. They were all formed by the resentment. What have you done? Mansion Master Xue Hentian narrowed his eyes and looked at the huge resentment cloud in the sky. He stared at Zhuowen and shouted. Xue Hentian had once struck the blood cauldron 20 times. Although the resentment produced was terrifying, it was not as dense and huge as it was today. It was as if all the resentment in the blood cauldron had been released today. Moreover, Xue Hentian could clearly feel that the blood cauldron was only releasing the resentment. The even more terrifying pressure and blood qi had not been released. Is the blood cauldron helping Mujua? This strange thought suddenly appeared in Xue Hentian's mind, but he quickly rejected it. Although the blood cauldron had a spirit, Mujua had nothing to do with it. How could he help Mujua? However, Xue Hentian knew that the unusual state of the blood cauldron had something to do with Mujua. Zhuowen glanced at Xue Hentian and ignored him. With a stomp of his right foot, he leaped into the terrifying dark clouds of resentment. Where are you going? Xue Hentian narrowed his eyes and snorted coldly. He waved his right hand and a golden sword flew out. Under his mind, it chased after Zhuowen like a shuttle. The moment the sword flashed out, golden light exploded and transformed into a terrifying blazing sun that was slowly being born. The first Yongdao sword of the 9 Yongdao sword. I didn't expect the estate master to use the 9 Yongdao sword right away. Is he planning to kill Muzhua? Looking at the huge blazing sun, the surrounding people were shocked. The 9 Yongdao sword was an earthly immortal sacred weapon. Even the first Yongdao sword was enough to kill any martial artist below the heaven-defying Saint Realm. Even a heaven-defying Saint Realm martial artist would not dare to go against the first Yongdao sword. Muzhua is doomed. The estate master is going to kill him. Manager Tsung Feng grinned as if he had vented his anger. In midair, Zhuowen could feel the first Yongdao sword flying towards him. The coldness in his eyes intensified. Xue Henshin's sword was very tricky. It was aimed at his limbs. Obviously he wanted to break them. Zhuowen knew that he had not provoked Xue Hentian. However, Xue Hentian was so ruthless that Zhuowen was filled with coldness. Xiaoyu, help me control the first Yongdao sword. Zhuowen suddenly said to Xiaoyu, who was in the Azure Dragon Hall. At this moment, Xiaoyu, who was standing in the square of the Azure Dragon Hall, was excited. She clenched her fists and nodded. Brother Mu, don't worry. Xiaoyu will not let you down. As she spoke, the 9 Yang mark on Xiaoyu's collarbone suddenly burst out with a blazing golden light. A special power spread out from Xiaoyu's body like invisible tentacles. This special power surged out of the Azure Dragon Hall and landed in Zhuowen's right palm. Brother Mu, this is the power of control of my 9 Yang physique. With the power of control, you can forcibly control the 9 Yongdao sword. Fortunately, Xue Hentian only released the first Yongdao sword. The first Yongdao sword is the weakest and easiest to control. With my power of control, you can forcibly take the first Yongdao sword. After using the special power, Xiaoyu's face turned pale. She bit her lower lip and her body was drenched in sweat. Thank you for your hard work. Zhuowen nodded. He held the special power in his right hand. Zhuowen also silently revolved the underworld water droplets around his body as a precaution. Whoosh! The first Yongdao sword was extremely fast. It instantly arrived in front of Zhuowen. Zhuowen could even clearly feel the blazing heat from the first Yongdao sword. The heat was even more terrifying than the magma in the earth's core. As soon as the sword arrived, it slashed at Zhuowen's limbs. It wanted to cut off his limbs. Zhuowen's eyes were cold. His right hand formed into a claw. The special power in his palm burst out and grabbed the first Yongdao sword. Is this Muzhua courting death? He actually wants to catch the 9 Yongdao sword with his bare hands. Haha, the ignorant are truly fearless. Zhuowen's actions immediately caused an uproar of laughter. Many warriors had mocking and ridiculing looks in their eyes. They felt that Zhuowen was simply courting death. However, reality gave those who mocked Muzhua a big slap in the face. The moment Zhuowen's right hand touched the first Yongdao sword, the first Yongdao sword hummed. The humming of the sword was filled with fear and submission. Under everyone's watchful eyes, Zhuowen grabbed the first Yongdao sword in his hand, as if he was grabbing an ordinary sword. His actions were clean and efficient. In an instant, the entire place fell into silence. Xue Hentian stood rooted to the ground as if he had been petrified. After grabbing the first Yongdao sword, Zhuowen did not hesitate to put it into his spirit ring. Immediately after, he took a step forward and disappeared into the terrifying dark clouds formed by resentment like an arrow released from a bow. The moment Zhuowen entered the clouds of resentment, he immediately heard the endless wailing of ghosts and howling of wolves. The countless resentment in the surroundings were like cats that had seen a fish, rushing toward Zhuowen in a frenzy. However, Zhuowen only smiled coldly. More than 50 yellow spring water droplets surrounded him like hungry wolves. All the resentment that rushed towards him was refined by the yellow spring water droplets. After a while, a vacuum of a few feet was formed around Zhuowen. In this area, the resentment lingered, not daring to approach Zhuowen. What a terrifying amount of resentment. Is this the resentment that Xueding has accumulated for thousands of years? There should be more than this, right? Zhuowen walked leisurely in the endless resentment, but he was deep in thought. On the outside, Xue Hentian was furious. Although he did not understand why his first Yongdao sword was taken away by Muzhua, The Nine-Yang Dao sword was his foundation. Now that it had been taken away in front of everyone, Xue Hentian could not tolerate it. 6 great commanders and manager Songfeng. Follow me and break through the clouds of resentment. Muzhua will not be able to escape today. Xue Hentian shouted coldly and jumped up. Manager Songfeng naturally followed closely behind. Among the 6 great commanders, the first commander frowned slightly, but he did not disobey Xue Hentian's order. He also followed behind Xue Hentian with the other 5 great commanders. The group of 8 used their supreme strength to forcefully break open a hole in the resentment clouds and instantly entered. However, the clouds of resentment were too large, and the resentment inside was too dense. Therefore, after half an incense stick's time, Xue Hentian and the others returned empty-handed. Palace Master, Muzhua seems to have a secret technique that can make the resentment retreat. He is like a tiger that has grown wings in the clouds of resentment. It will not be easy for us to find him if we go in like this, Songfeng said in a low voice. Then what should we do? And how did this kid take away the first Yang Dao sword of the 9 Yang Dao sword? The first Yang Dao sword has been completely refined by me, but it was taken away by him. This is too strange. Xue Hentian was most concerned about his first Yang Dao sword. After all, it was an earthly immortal sacred weapon and his strongest trump card. Now that it had been taken away by Zhuowen, how could he not be anxious? Song Feng's eyes flashed as he suddenly thought of something. He said in a low voice, Palace Master, in today's world, the only people who can take the 9 Yang Dao sword are the descendants of the 9 Yang Heavenly Lord, who possess the 9 Yang Constitution. You think that Muzhua possesses the 9 Yang Constitution, and is a descendant of the 9 Yang Heavenly Lord? Xue Hentian narrowed his eyes. Other than this guess, I can't think of any other reason. Moreover, this person was brought here by the Blood General. Perhaps he knows something, Songfeng said. Xue Hentian's gaze shifted slightly and finally landed on Xue Mo, who was not far away. His eyes were cold as he said, Blood General, this person is your helper. Do you have anything to say? Feeling Xue Hentian's sharp gaze, Xue Mo complained in his heart. He did not expect that Zhuowen would cause such a big commotion, and even take away Xue Hentian's first Yang Dao sword in the end. Blood General, don't think that I won't dare to touch you just because those old men are protecting you. Seeing Xue Mo remain silent, Xue Hentian was a little annoyed and his tone became heavier. Xue Mo's eyes flashed as he sighed and said, Palace Master, I didn't expect this either. In order to make up for my mistake, I'm willing to reveal a secret to you. Xue Hentian raised his eyebrows and immediately became interested. He asked, What secret? It's about Muzhua's true origin. This is very important to you, Palace Master, Xue Mo said seriously. Chapter 1633. Rushing into the entrance, the clouds of resentment suddenly sank, and a terrifying suction force erupted from the mouth of the blood cauldron. The clouds of resentment swirled and sank into the mouth of the blood cauldron. What's going on? Blood General stared at the scene in surprise. The entrance to the blood pool has been opened. The blood cauldron intends to let Muzhua in. This is a privilege exclusive to the person who hits the blood cauldron 20 times, Xue Hentian said with an ugly expression. Since the entrance has been opened, can't we go in? Blood General asked with a frown. Xue Hentian shook his head and said in a low voice, Without the permission of the person who opened it, no one else can enter. And this time, the blood cauldron is acting a little strange. It released such a huge amount of resentment, as if it's protecting Muzhua. Master, do you mean that without Muzhua's permission, we can't enter the blood pool? Xue Mo asked with a gloomy look. You can say that. Since the blood pool has been opened once, it will take half a year to open it again. Since Muzhua opened it this time, I can only wait half a year. Xue Hentian's eyes flashed coldly as he said, However, if Muzhua wants to enter the blood pool, he must pass through the mouth of the cauldron. We can stop him there. Xue Hentian said to Songfeng and the 6 commanders, I'll have to trouble the 7 of you to stop Muzhua with me. We must take him down. Naturally, General Manager Songfeng agreed readily. On the other hand, the other 6 great commanders did not respond. Instead, the 5 great commanders all looked towards the first commander, seeking his opinion. Commander Lang Yi, as the first commander, you should do your best to serve the blood-refining mansion. I, Xue Hentian, am the mansion master of the blood-refining mansion. Do you want to disobey the orders of the mansion master? Xue Hentian said majestically. The first commander Lang Yi looked indifferent. He took a deep look at Xue Hentian and nodded slightly. Since the mansion master has spoken, Lang Yi will do his best. All right, then we'll split up in the 8 directions of the blood cauldron. Once Muzhua appears, we'll immediately intercept him and prevent him from entering the blood refinement divine pond. As Xue Hentian spoke, the 8 of them floated above the blood cauldron. Their eyes were fixed on the funnel-shaped pillar of resentment, constantly observing the situation inside. With the Manor Lord, the 6 great commanders, and Steward Songfeng joining forces, this Muzhua really won't be able to escape. Looking at this formation, many of the surrounding warriors were horrified. This formation was enough to kill any heaven-defying Saint Realm saint. Although Muzhua's strength was indeed strangely powerful, his cultivation was too low, and it would be difficult for him to escape from the encirclement of these 8 people. The blood demon's eyes flickered, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he looked at everything indifferently. Within the resentment clouds, Zhuowen naturally saw this scene as well. His eyes slowly narrowed as he felt a chill in his heart. He had not expected Xue Hentian to be so ruthless. Among the 8 people, 4 of them are heaven-defying saints, and the remaining 4 are all at the peak of the Sky Saint realm. With such a formation, it's difficult for my body to contend with. I can only let the great success saint being come out. Thinking of this, Zhuowen sighed softly. The great success saint being, who was originally sitting cross-legged in a courtyard in the Blue Dragon Square, suddenly opened his eyes. The golden veins all over his body burst out with a blazing golden light, and his eyes were as dazzling as the sun. Then he took a step forward and disappeared from the courtyard, appearing in front of Zhuowen. Combine with me and rush into the blood refinement divine pond, Zhuowen said indifferently. The great success saint being smiled and approached Zhuowen step by step. The 2 of them instantly stuck together, and combined into one in the golden light. The form-swapping divine body is indeed magical. The great success saint being has been separated from me for a while, but now that we have combined, there is no sense of strangeness at all. Zhuowen squeezed his hands and felt the powerful power brought by the great success saint being. This caused a ray of light to burst out from Zhuowen's eyes. He could feel that after the great success saint being had been tempered by the golden lightning body quenching slurry, it had reached an extremely powerful level. With the power of his great success saint being, even a heaven-defying Saint Realm expert would not be able to kill him. Of course, it would still be difficult for Zhuowen to fight against Xue Hentian and the first commander, who were at the peak of the heaven-defying Saint Realm. Moreover, this time, Xue Hentian had teamed up with the first commander and the other 7 people. Zhuowen knew that even with the power of the great success saint being, it would be difficult for him to rush in. Fortunately, I used the golden thunder bamboo to collect the blood lightning. Now it can finally be put to use. Zhuowen flicked his finger and took out a golden thunder bamboo from his spirit ring. His right finger touched the surface of the golden thunder bamboo. Suddenly, the blood lightning surged from the surface of the golden thunder bamboo. It spread from Zhuowen's fingertip to Zhuowen's entire body. What a terrifying blood lightning! Even with my great success saint being, I feel that I can't withstand it. Zhuowen's body trembled. He quickly circulated the power of the great success saint being. The blood lightning was indeed terrifying. Zhuowen's body was already terrifying enough, but there were still some places that were charred by the power of the blood lightning. When the blood lightning had spread to his entire body and formed a blood lightning defense, Zhuowen secretly spread more than 50 underworld water droplets all over his body. Whoosh! Zhuowen's right foot stepped into the void. Immediately after, he was like an arrow that had been released from a bow. He followed the funnel-shaped tunnel below the clouds of resentment and rushed down like lightning. His speed soared to the extreme. Zhuowen's undisguised behavior naturally attracted the attention of Xue Hentian and the others below. He's coming. Mujua is coming. Get ready to intercept him. Xue Henshin's eyes were filled with coldness. He clenched his right hand, and a terrifying saint power rushed out like a wild beast. At the same time, he took out a black broadsword. The surface of the black broadsword was covered with black scales. From afar, it looked like a small black dragon. This broadsword was called the Black Dragon Broadsword. It was a heaven-defying saint weapon. It was Xue Henshin's personal saint weapon. However, after he had obtained the Nine Yongdao sword, he rarely used this heaven-defying saint weapon. However, since Zhuowen had taken away his first Yongdao sword, he did not dare to use it again. He was afraid that the scene from before would happen again. General Manager Tsang Feng gripped the giant black spear tightly while the first commander and the other 6 supreme commanders each took out their respective saint weapons. Saint energy surged, and in an instant, the saint energy between the 8 of them surged out like a tsunami. It was a terrifying sight to behold. Slash! The moment Zhuowen appeared in the field of vision of the 8 people, Xue Hentian mercilessly slashed out with his broadsword. A soaring broadsword chi transformed into a huge black dragon. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it rushed out. Following closely behind were 7 terrifying attacks from General Manager Tsang Feng and the other 6 commanders. For a moment, the 8 attacks were launched together. The sky changed color, and the clouds gathered. It was as if the sky was falling and the earth was splitting. It was extremely terrifying. How terrifying! Mujua is finished. The combination of these 8 attacks is enough to kill a heaven-defying Saint Realm warrior. Even a half-immortal would not dare to casually resist such a terrifying attack. As soon as the 8 attacks were displayed, it caused an uproar. These 8 attacks were too terrifying. Just by looking at the power that erupted from them, some of the weaker warriors trembled and knelt on the ground. Zhuowen, who was in the resentment tunnel, narrowed his eyes. The golden veins on the surface of his body became even denser, and the golden light became even more dazzling. He had raised the power of his great success holy body to the extreme. Charge! Zhuowen did not care. His speed suddenly soared. When he was only a dozen meters away from the mouth of the blood cauldron, the 8 attacks had already reached his body. Boom! The first attack blasted on the blood lightning on the surface of his body. The blood lightning directly counterattacked, wanting to annihilate the 8 attacks. The power of the blood lightning was truly terrifying. It actually annihilated 4 of the 8 attacks. However, these 4 attacks were the weakest of the 8. After annihilating these 4 attacks, the blood lightning also completely collapsed. The remaining 4 attacks continued to move forward and blasted on the defense of the underworld water droplets. Then the underworld water droplets that covered Zhuowen's body began to be annihilated drop by drop. 10 drops, 20 drops, 30 drops, until all the underworld water droplets were annihilated. 2 of the 4 attacks were also neutralized by the defense of the underworld water droplets. However, the last 2 attacks were the strongest because they came from the first commander and Xue Hentian respectively. One attack was a black dragon formed by the saber aura, and the other attack was a fierce tiger formed by the spear aura. The power of the dragon and the tiger was enough to shake the heavens and the earth. These 2 attacks were the core of the 8 attacks. Xue Henshin's eyes flickered as he coldly said, "This Mujua is really unusual. He actually annihilated 6 of the attacks. However, this is the end." 9-turn golden split pattern for pattern superposition. Golden light burst out from Zhuowen's body, and 4 golden patterns appeared. The 4 golden patterns layered in front of Zhuowen, blocking the 2 attacks. Bang! 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 Then, Zhuowen let out a muffled groan as the 4 golden patterns shattered one by one. However, the fierce tiger formed by the spear aura collapsed, leaving only the black dragon formed by the saber aura. Charge! Zhuowen did not care. He almost raised his great success divine body to the extreme. He immediately gave up on any defense and rushed into the mouth of the cauldron to welcome the black dragon. Is this guy looking for his own death? Seeing Zhuowen's crazy actions, many people had strange looks on their faces. Boom! Zhuowen collided with the black dragon in an instant, and he immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. However, the black dragon in front of him was shattered by his physical body. Zhuowen's momentum did not decrease as he instantly entered the mouth of the cauldron. The moment Zhuowen entered the mouth of the cauldron, the resentment clouds in the sky were completely sucked into the blood cauldron. In an instant, the noisy square became exceptionally quiet. Shui Hentian stood in place. He opened his mouth and finally muttered, "This guy actually used his physical body to collide with my saber aura attack. He even broke my saber aura? Is this possible?" Chapter 1634. The Blood Cauldron's Spirit. It was a blood-red world. As far as the eye could see, everything was blood-red. The surrounding blood-red walls were wriggling like walls of flesh. As they wriggled, they secreted a lot of mucus, which looked disgusting. In this blood-red world, Zhuowen's eyes were filled with dense resentment. These resentment transformed into ferocious faces that looked terrifying and ferocious. Fortunately, Zhuowen was surrounded by the underworld water droplets. Therefore, these resentment were very afraid and didn't dare to approach Zhuowen. This should be a passage. I'm afraid it's also the inner world of the blood cauldron. This blood cauldron has been worshipped by creatures for thousands of years. It has developed a spirit and is extremely extraordinary. Since it has developed a spirit, this blood cauldron also has emotions. It can feel anger, sadness, fear. The resentment of the creatures that have died for thousands of years all resides in this blood cauldron. If this blood cauldron was just an inanimate object, perhaps it wouldn't feel so much. However, this blood cauldron has developed a spirit. These resentment will cause trouble for the blood cauldron. Xiaohei appeared on Zhuowen's shoulder. Her small eyes revealed a trace of caution. It seems that my luck is not bad. If I hadn't sensed the blood cauldron's emotions and said that I could cure its resentment, I'm afraid that with my strength, I won't be able to ring it 20 times. Zhuowen's eyes revealed a lingering fear. He knew that with his strength alone, even if he used his saint body, he might not be able to ring the blood cauldron 20 times. Of course, if he had hundreds or thousands of underworld water droplets, he might be able to ring the blood cauldron 20 times. However, in the process of absorbing the resentment, Zhuowen discovered that as the number of underworld water droplets increased, the difficulty of condensing them also increased. Human, you can absorb resentment. Help me get rid of these annoying resentment. Suddenly, a slightly old voice resounded in Zhuowen's mind. This old voice contained a trace of excitement and fluctuation. Zhuowen turned his gaze and immediately knew that the owner of the voice should be the blood cauldron spirit. Zhuowen nodded and waved his sleeve. Instantly, the 50+ yellow springs droplets within his body shot out. In an instant, all the resentment in an area of a few meters around him was completely absorbed, whereas the other resentment roared and retreated repeatedly. Good. You really can get rid of resentment. Human, help me. The blood cauldron spirit's voice was filled with excitement. I can indeed do that, but I can't just come here to expel Senior's resentment for nothing, right? It is said that there is a blood-refining divine pond inside the blood cauldron. I wonder if Senior can take me there? Zhuowen said with a slight smile. The blood cauldron spirit was silent for a moment, and then said in a deep voice, "Okay, but before that, you have to help me get rid of the resentment in this bloody channel. I'm so scared by this resentment that I don't dare to show up. After you get rid of the resentment in this passageway, I will bring you to the blood refinement divine pond." Zhuowen's eyes narrowed as he said indifferently, "I don't mind such a small matter. Senior, please wait for me for a few days." After saying that, Zhuowen waved his right hand, and the void laws surged out and adhered to the surface of the Yellow Springs water droplets. In an instant, the Yellow Springs water droplets' speed became extremely fast, like lightning, absorbing the surrounding resentment. Zhuowen sat cross-legged on the spot, his mind completely focused on the Yellow Springs water droplets. 3 days later, all the resentment in the bloody channel had been absorbed by Zhuowen's Yellow Springs water droplets. His Yellow Springs water droplets had grown from 50 to 70. It should be fine now, right? Zhuowen suddenly opened his eyes and slowly stood up. He stared at the bloody wall of flesh around him and said slowly. He knew that the blood cauldron spirit must be in this bloody wall of flesh. As soon as he said that, the bloody wall of flesh around him wriggled violently. Then, Zhuowen's pupils shrank as he saw a human figure slowly emerge from the bloody wall to his left. The human figure peeled off from the wall of flesh and appeared in front of Zhuowen. It was an old man over 70 years old with white hair and a white beard. His face was full of wrinkles, but his eyes shone with a strange bloody light. "Little friend, I didn't expect you to have a technique to absorb resentment. I've found the right person." The old man stared at the 70 Yellow Springs water droplets around Zhuowen and smiled faintly. Zhuowen was expressionless as he said indifferently, "Senior, the blood refinement divine pond we discussed." The white-haired old man patted his head and laughed. "Little friend, you're right. Follow me. The blood refinement divine pond is at the end of the bloody channel. Shuahentian often came here, but what?" Zhuowen frowned. "Haha. Didn't you say that you could completely expel resentment for me? So, I released all the resentment I've been suppressing. There are nearly 100 bloody channels like the one we're in, and each of them is filled with resentment. These channels are all in your hands." The old man cupped his fists at Zhuowen. On the other hand, Zhuowen's expression changed slightly, and he cursed in his heart at how cunning this old fellow was. He hadn't expected that this old fellow would release all the resentment in his body. This was truly beyond Zhuowen's expectations. However, absorbing resentment was beneficial to Zhuowen. Although he was quite unhappy, there was nothing he could do. "Senior, please lead the way. I want to see the blood refinement divine pond first," Zhuowen said. The old man nodded and led the way. Zhuowen followed closely behind. In the outside world, 3 days had passed since the commander battle. However, the discussions in the Blood Refinement Mansion and Emerald Blood County did not die down. Instead, they became more and more intense like a storm. The main character of this storm was a young man named Wuxia. Everyone knew that the young man named Wuxia had knocked on the blood cauldron 20 times. His result had far surpassed the number 1 general, Shi Lai, and was on par with Mansion Master Shuahentian. What was even more terrifying was that after Wuxia had knocked on the blood cauldron 20 times, he had opened the entrance to the Blood Refinement Divine Pond. When he was about to enter the entrance, Mansion Master Shuahentian led Supervisor Tsang Feng and the 6 great commanders to stop him. Among the 8 great experts, 4 of them were at the Heaven-Defying Saint stage while the other 4 were at the Peak of the Sky Saint stage. Such a force was enough to annihilate a Heaven-Defying Saint stage expert. However, Wuxia had forcibly broken through the 8 people's joint attack and directly entered the entrance of the Blood Refinement Divine Pond. What was even more terrifying was that Wuxia was only at the Arcane Shattering Saint stage. With such a cultivation base, he was able to break through the obstruction of the 8 great experts led by Shuahentian. This was definitely a miracle in the eyes of others. In the past 3 days, as the rumors spread, Wuxia had become more and more godly. If Zhuowen had been present and heard this, he would have been embarrassed. In the Blood Refinement Mansion, Shuahentian sat at the head of the hall. In front of him, Shuemo stood with his fists cupped. Shuahentian frowned slightly as his eyes flickered as if he was thinking about something. Shuemo stood silently on the spot and did not speak. After a while, Shuahentian's gaze fell on Shuemo as he said in a deep voice, "Blood General, is your news true?" Shuemo's gaze was firm as he nodded and said, "Rest assured, Mansion Master. I once stayed with Zhuowen for a long time, and only recently returned to the central region. I can't be wrong about Zhuowen's aura. Wuxia is the Zhuowen that young Master Jiang Binhan of the Ice and Fire family is looking for. I won't make this up. Perhaps Mansion Master doesn't know that Zhuowen has a secret technique that can change his appearance. This secret technique can even change his aura." Shuahentian narrowed his eyes and nodded. Immediately he stared at Shuemo and said coldly, "Since you know that Wuxia is Zhuowen, why didn't you report to me earlier? If I knew Wuxia's identity, I wouldn't have caused so much trouble." Shuemo's eyes flickered as he lowered his head and did not answer. He knew that he would be in the wrong no matter how he explained, so he might as well not explain. Shuahentian stared coldly at Shuemo as his right hand gently touched the armrest. After a moment of silence he slowly said, "Since this is your first offense, I won't pursue this matter. You may leave. Shuemo's gaze flickered as he cupped his fists and slowly left the hall. It seems that this blood general is very important to those old guys. They actually paid a huge price to protect him. Muzhua really surprised me. He's clearly a fragmentation saint, but he can actually do such a thing. He's really a peerless monster. Unfortunately, Muzhua is the person that the Ice and Fire family's young master is looking for. Moreover, young master Jiang Binhan's offer is also very tempting. I can only give him to young master Jiang Binhan. Xue Hentian took out a communication jade charm and entered a message. After a while, Supervisor Song Feng walked in. Greetings, Mansion Master. Song Feng knelt on one knee and said in a deep voice. Xue Hentian waved his sleeve and handed a communication jade charm to Song Feng. He said, send this to the Ice and Fire family's young master Jiang Binhan. Song Feng put away the communication jade charm. Although he was puzzled, he did not ask any questions. Also, send more people to the blood refining square. If Muzhua comes out, immediately capture him, and inform me immediately. Xue Hentian said in a deep voice. Song Feng said respectfully, rest assured, Mansion Master. I have already sent more people. Commander Lang Yi also volunteered to guard the blood refining square. Lang Yi volunteered to stay at the blood refining square? He usually doesn't take the initiative like this. Xue Hentian frowned. I don't know about this. Song Feng said. Then you may leave. Watch the blood refining square closely. Send this communication jade charm to the Ice and Fire family as soon as possible. Xue Hentian said. Song Feng cupped his fists and left silently. Although this Zhuowen is a little strange, he's only a fragmentation saint. With the strength of the Ice and Fire family, why does young master Jiang Binhan care so much about this Zhuowen? After Song Feng left, Xue Hentian's eyes flickered. He was puzzled. Chapter 1635. Promotion to Heavenly Saint. After walking out of the blood-red tunnel, Zhuowen saw a huge blood-red hall. The blood-red hall was also made of blood-red flesh walls, and they were constantly squirming. In the center of the hall, there was a pool of blood that was about 100 feet wide. The pool was filled with surging blood water that flowed endlessly. Zhuowen could feel that the pool of blood contained a rich power of blood. The power of blood was so great that it made Zhuowen feel deep veneration. At the same time, Zhuowen found that the hall was filled with resentment. The resentment had transformed into countless ferocious faces. There were human figures, beast figures, and other strange shapes. The hall was huge, and there were far more resentment than the bloody tunnel Zhuowen had been in before. That pool of blood is the blood refining divine pool. It contains the essence blood of countless creatures over the years. It's very beneficial to warriors who enter it, especially for someone like you who has entered it for the first time. The blood refining divine pool will benefit you the most. As for the resentment, you can think of a way to get rid of it yourself. I'll take my leave first. After saying that, the white-haired old man suddenly whistled beside Zhuowen. In an instant, all the resentment in the hall cast their gazes toward Zhuowen. The ferocious gazes made Zhuowen's scalp tingle. Young man, work hard. I believe that these resentments are nothing to you. The white-haired old man patted Zhuowen's shoulder. Soon after, he drilled into the meat wall beside him. This old bastard. Zhuowen could not help but curse. The blood cauldron's spirit had tricked him. It had purposely drawn the resentment's attention to him. However, Zhuowen also knew that the blood cauldron's spirit was probably afraid that Zhuowen would not do his best to get rid of the resentment. That was why it had used such a method. Whoosh! The massive amount of resentment whizzed over like an avalanche, instantly drowning Zhuowen. There's really a lot of resentment here. Zhuowen frowned slightly. The 70 drops of yellow springs around him spun at high speed. The power of cycles continuously refined the resentment in the surroundings. Unfortunately, there were just too many resentful spirits. Even with the yellow springs water droplets defense, there were still many resentful spirits that passed through the gaps and headed straight for Zhuowen's body. It was a good thing that Zhuowen's original body had fused with his holy body. His body was unparalleled in the world. Although there were many resentments, they didn't cause too much harm to him. Although resentment could affect one's mind, Zhuowen's willpower was firm. Most of the resentment was blocked by him, so his mind wasn't affected too much. Taking a deep breath, Zhuowen slowly walked towards the blood refinement divine pond while being enveloped by boundless resentment. After about 15 minutes, Zhuowen arrived at the side of the blood refinement divine pond. He could even feel the rich power of blood gushing out from within. I hope the blood refinement divine pond can really help me break through to the heavenly saint realm. Zhuowen took off his shirt and immediately jumped into the blood refinement divine pond. Zhuowen knew very well that his current situation wasn't good. He had taken Xue Henshin's first Yangdao sword, so Xue Hentian would definitely not let him off. Moreover, Xue Emo knew Zhuowen's true identity. Now that something had happened to Zhuowen, Xue Emo probably wouldn't stay still. When the time came, there was a high possibility that his true identity would be exposed. Zhuowen knew that if his strength increased by another level, it would be much easier for him to face Xue Hentian and the others again. Whoosh! The moment Zhuowen stepped into the blood refinement divine pond, the surrounding blood started to boil. Following that, Zhuowen was shocked to find that an extremely rich power was entering his body from his acupuncture points, spreading to his limbs and bones. At that moment, he felt a warm feeling all over his body. It was a very comfortable feeling. Zhuowen couldn't help but let out a comfortable groan and squint his eyes. The moment Zhuowen entered the blood refinement divine pond, the resentment that had been pestering Zhuowen all retreated, as if the blood refinement divine pond was their taboo. Trying to escape? It won't be that easy. Seeing that the surrounding resentment was escaping, Zhuowen's gaze grew colder. He pinched his sword fingers with his right hand and immediately, more than 70 underworld water droplets shot out and started to sweep away the surrounding resentment. Zhuowen knew very well that if all the resentment was absorbed by the underworld water droplets, it would definitely be able to create more than double the number of underworld water droplets. As the number of underworld water droplets increased, the power of his slaughtering underworld finger would naturally increase as well. While Zhuowen was immersed in the blood refinement divine pond, his second clone came to a courtyard in the Azure Dragon Square. This courtyard was arranged by Zhuowen for Elder Fu and Xiaoyu to stay in. Young Master Mu, Big Brother Mu, Old Fu and Xiaoyu stood up one after another with a cautious look on their faces. They had already found out about what had happened outside the Azure Dragon Hall. The battle between Zhuowen and the 8 great experts of the blood hatred sky was deeply imprinted in their minds. The youth before them didn't seem old and his cultivation wasn't high, but his strength had shocked the two of them. Xiaoyu's face was filled with admiration, while Elder Fu was hopeful. He knew that the youth before them might really be able to help them kill Xue Hen Heaven. Zhuowen waved his sleeve and took out a treasured sword that was as bright as the sun. He said, "Xiaoyu, can you help me refine this first Yangdao sword? Didn't we agree that this first Yangdao sword should be one of the rewards for helping you?" "Don't worry, Big Brother Mu. I have the 9 Yang physique. I can help you erase Xue Hen Heaven's imprint. Moreover, I will imprint my aura on the first Yangdao sword to help Big Brother Mu refine it." Xiaoyu agreed without hesitation. "Thank you for your hard work." Zhuowen nodded and handed the first Yangdao sword to Xiaoyu. Time passed by slowly. In a flash, 1 month had passed. At this moment, the resentment in the blood refinement hall had become much thinner. Most of the resentment had escaped into other passages in the hall, not daring to face the underworld water droplets. As for the underworld water droplets, they had increased from 70 to 200. With these 200 underworld water droplets, Zhuowen's slaughtering underworld finger would be many times more powerful than before. At this moment, the blood refinement pool was boiling. In the middle of the blood refinement pool, a topless figure was quietly sitting cross-legged like a stone statue. The figure's upper body was covered with countless blood-red veins. The blood energy in the blood refinement pool flowed into the figure's body through these veins. Zhuowen abruptly opened his eyes. An array of light flickered within them. The aura on his body continued to rise, as if a ferocious beast was gradually awakening within his body. His aura skyrocketed from the early stage of the arcane shattering saint realm to the peak of the arcane shattering saint realm. However, at the peak of the arcane-shattering Saint realm, Zhuowen's aura began to slow down and even showed signs of stagnation. You can't let this growing aura stagnate. You have to break through it in one go. Otherwise, you won't have the chance to become a heavenly saint. If you miss this opportunity, you don't know when you'll be able to break through again. Xiao Hei's calm voice sounded in Zhuowen's mind. Zhuowen nodded. Without hesitation, he took out porcelain bottles from his spiritual ring. These porcelain bottles were filled with immortal elixirs. Of course, they were all upper-grade immortal elixirs. There was a limit to the number of immortal elixirs. He would not waste them. After opening the bottle corks, Zhuowen poured out all the upper-grade immortal elixirs from the porcelain bottles. Then his saint power swept up the immortal elixirs like a snake. He crushed them one by one and absorbed all the medicinal efficacy into his body. With the help of the medicinal efficacy of these immortal elixirs, Zhuowen's aura, which had stagnated before, began to rise rapidly again. Not enough. Zhuowen's eyes were sharp. With a wave of his right hand, he took out another porcelain bottle from his spiritual ring. This porcelain bottle contained immortal elixirs. Zhuowen sighed softly. He felt a little pained. There was a limit to the number of immortal elixirs. If not for the fact that he had no other choice, he would not have dared to waste them. However, Zhuowen was a decisive person. He opened the bottle cork. There were only 3 immortal elixirs in it. His saint power swept out and wrapped around the 3 immortal elixirs. He crushed them one by one. A surge of medicinal efficacy swept out. Zhuowen's aura reached its peak in an instant. At this moment, the 8 types of rules in Zhuowen's body suddenly flowed through his meridians from his sea of consciousness and merged with the saint power in his dantian. At this moment, Zhuowen could clearly feel that the fusion of his saint energy and the precepts had reached a perfect level. With just a thought, he could use saint energy that contained 8 precepts. The nascent soul in his dantian began to curl up. Finally, it turned into a round golden elixir that shone with golden light. Nascent soul transformation elixir. Zhuowen's eyes were sharp. The essential difference between a profound saint and a heavenly saint was that the profound saint's source of power was still the nascent soul, while the heavenly saint's source of power was the origin elixir. The origin elixir carried much purer saint power than the nascent soul. Moreover, the origin elixir was not as fragile as the nascent soul. It could withstand heavy blows. Moreover, as long as the origin elixir was not destroyed, it would be much easier to recover than the nascent soul. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and quietly felt the transformation in his body. He could feel that the saint power in his body was much denser and more powerful than the fragmented saint realm. This metamorphosis brought him an improvement in all aspects. All the secret techniques and cultivation methods on his body were enhanced with this metamorphosis. Even the power of the laws was much stronger than before. Take the law of the void as an example. If the current Zhuowen used the law of the void, he could travel much further than before. With Zhuowen's current strength, using 8 types of rules, it was no problem for him to kill a Sun Sky Saint Realm expert. Of course, if he added the slaughtering finger of Styx, Zhuowen could instantly kill a Sky Saint Realm expert. Little guy, now that I'm a heavenly saint, you should recognize me as your master, right? Zhuowen smiled faintly. He suddenly untied the fiery red belt on his waist and spoke in a somewhat mocking manner. Chapter 1636. Songlong Taoist and Huang Quan. The huge magma in front of him was the heaven-defying divine artifact, the spirit-devouring magma river. When Zhuowen found the spirit-devouring magma river in the Songlong Hall, the artifact spirit of the spirit-devouring magma river did not acknowledge Zhuowen as its master. Now that Zhuowen had advanced to the heavenly saint realm, Zhuowen naturally wanted to see if the spirit-devouring magma river was willing to acknowledge him as its master. The spirit-devouring magma river floated in the air. After a moment of silence, a rather childish voice came out. Your cultivation is still not enough, but your strength is barely passable. I will reluctantly acknowledge you as my master. After that, the spirit-devouring magma river shrank to a few dozen feet in size and floated in front of Zhuowen. Hearing the words of the spirit-devouring magma river, Zhuowen could not help but laugh. The artifact spirit of the spirit-devouring magma river was really childish. However, Zhuowen was quite happy that the spirit-devouring magma river was willing to acknowledge him as its master. Biting his thumb, Zhuowen dripped a drop of blood on the spirit-devouring magma river. Then, Zhuowen felt a sense of intimacy, as if the spirit-devouring magma river in front of him had become his left and right arms, and everything was under his control. Although Zhuowen had obtained the spirit-devouring magma river in the past, he was unable to make the spirit-devouring magma river recognize him as its master, so he could not unleash its full power. Now that the spirit-devouring magma river had acknowledged him as its master, Zhuowen knew that he could fully unleash its full power. With the spirit-devouring magma river alone, he could fight with a heaven-defying divine realm warrior. Young man, you did well. You actually cleaned up the resentment of the old man here. Suddenly, an aged voice came from the blood-red hall. Zhuowen's eyes suddenly became gloomy. He was naturally familiar with the owner of the voice. It was the spirit of the blood cauldron. Zhuowen slowly turned around and looked at the old man who walked out of the wall of flesh with a smile on his face. He said in a slightly displeased tone, "Senior really came at the right time. I just got rid of the resentment, and Senior came out." The old man did not care about Zhuowen's displeasure. Instead, he stretched and said, "It's really comfortable. This is the first time in 10,000 years I feel so comfortable." "Looks like you're angry, little guy. Hey, young man, don't be so narrow-minded. There are still dozens of passages magma river. There is resentment is cauldron studio is. There is resentment book studio is." Looking at the old man's smiling face, Zhuowen's mouth twitched, and he had the urge to slap him. "It's all thanks to the blood refinement divine pond and senior that I was able to advance to the heavenly saint realm." Zhuowen sighed softly. He cupped his hands together towards the old man before taking a step forward and disappearing from the blood-colored hall. Finger is finger? The is. If I remember correctly, this is Taoist Songlong's unique celestial skill, right? This celestial skill has been lost for a long time after Taoist Songlong disappeared. I'm afraid there are not many people who can recognize this celestial skill, right? The yellow spring on this kid's body is from the same source as the slaughtering yellow spring finger that Taoist Songlong used 10,000 years ago. Could it be that this kid has obtained Taoist Songlong's inheritance? When Zhuowen disappeared, the smile on the old man's face slowly disappeared, and a thoughtful look appeared in his eyes. "I didn't expect that a spiritual body born in a small mortal cauldron like you could recognize the slaughtering yellow spring finger. You really surprised me." Just as the old man finished speaking, an indifferent voice suddenly came from behind him. The old man's pupils shrank, and he suddenly retreated. His pupils shrank as he stared at the figure behind him who was leaning against a blood-colored meat wall. The figure was dressed in a black robe, and his long hair covered his face. His face was faintly discernible, and his true appearance could not be seen clearly. If Zhuowen was here, he would definitely recognize him. Wasn't this the first mountain god? "Who are you?" The old man was drenched in cold sweat as he stared at the first mountain god in front of him. In his blood cauldron world he was the master, but he did not notice the black-robed man who had appeared behind him. "Who I am is not important. I just want to know, how did you recognize the slaughtering yellow spring finger?" The first mountain god slowly raised his head, and a pair of eyes that were as sharp as an eagle's exuded a murderous intent. When the old man saw that pair of eyes, his whole body trembled, and he almost fell to the ground. The old man was the spirit of the blood cauldron, and the blood cauldron had been watered by the blood of countless living beings for thousands of years. The old man had seen countless killings and murderous intents, but compared to the murderous intent in the eyes of the black-robed man, it was like the difference between heaven and earth. The black-robed man's eyes made the old man feel an unbearable heaviness. It was as if this gaze could make him disappear completely with just a thought. At this moment, how could the old man not know that he had encountered the most terrifying existence he had ever seen in his life? He was experienced and knowledgeable, and he could feel that this person was as terrifying as the peerless expert from 10,000 years ago. "Speak." The first mountain god slowly spat out the word, and his voice was filled with murderous intent. Although this lowly one is an ordinary cauldron, my existence can be traced back to the catastrophe 10,000 years ago. During that catastrophe, this lowly one was just an ordinary cauldron, but many peerless experts fell during that catastrophe. This lowly one was watered with the blood of a peerless expert, so this lowly one developed spiritual intelligence. Because this lowly one was insignificant, I was lucky enough to survive. After the catastrophe, martial arts declined, and the battlefield was split into the Serene Corpse impasse by the Almighty. This lowly one was luckily brought out of the Serene Corpse impasse by the first blood refining mansion master. Because this lowly one had some spiritual intelligence, the first blood refining mansion master left this lowly one in the blood refining mansion. Later, as time passed, this lowly one was gradually used as a sacrificial object. Over time, this lowly one became the blood cauldron. The old man quickly knelt on the ground, and did not dare to raise his head to look at the first mountain god. In one breath, he revealed his origin. The reason this lowly one recognized the slaughtering finger of Yellow Spring was mainly because I accidentally saw the battle between the Tsonglong Taoist and the heavenly insect. The Tsonglong Taoist used the slaughtering finger of Yellow Spring. Although that brat only grasped a small amount of Yellow Spring, that was indeed the aura of the slaughtering finger of Yellow Spring. The first mountain god leaned on the blood-colored flesh wall and calmly stared at the old man without saying a word. The old man knelt on the ground and did not dare to raise his head. "I see," the first mountain god murmured. The first mountain god murmured softly as a look of reminiscence appeared in his eyes. However, he quickly regained his senses and said calmly, "Since you still have the image of Taoist Song Long using the slaughtering finger of sticks in your memory, show it to Zhuowen." The old man's body trembled. After a moment of hesitation, he agreed. "Yes." When the old man raised his head again, he found that the first mountain god had disappeared. "Oh my God! Who is this person? He's too terrifying. It's as if he could kill me with just a glance." However, judging from his words and actions, he should be related to that brat just now. It seems that I can only do as he said and show him the image of the Tsonglong Taoist using the slaughtering finger of Yellow Spring. The old man sighed softly and blamed himself for talking too much. If he did not talk too much, he would not have attracted that terrifying existence just now. After a while, Zhuowen walked out of the passage. At this moment, the Yellow Spring water droplets surrounding him had grown to more than 220 droplets. Seeing Zhuowen come out, the old man sighed softly and quickly walked up to him. He said, "Little friend, is that the slaughtering finger of Yellow Spring you used?" Zhuowen, who was originally happy, suddenly changed his expression. He looked at the old man warily and said, "How did you know?" When Zhuowen cultivated the slaughtering finger of Yellow Spring, the jade slip had already said that this celestial art was Tsonglong Taoist's unique celestial art. Moreover, the early stage was too weak, so it was impossible for others to think of it as a celestial art. This was also the reason why Zhuowen dared to use and cultivate the slaughtering finger of Yellow Spring so openly. Now that the blood cauldron spirit recognized the slaughtering finger of Yellow Spring at a glance, Zhuowen was really stunned. "Ah, let me show you an image, and you'll understand everything." The old man sighed lightly, and then his emaciated right hand pointed towards the sky. Instantly, the blood within the blood refinement divine pool within the hall suddenly surged and shot into the sky. And then it formed into an enormous scene. In the image, there were many scenes flashing, and then the scene froze on one of them. It was a land full of devastation. On this land, there were many ravines, like the wrinkles on an old man's face. They were densely packed and revealed the vicissitudes of life and sorrow at all times. Zhuowen knew that this land was being baptized by the flames of war, and countless lives had been buried in it. Suddenly, in the distance, darkness surged over. This darkness covered the sky and invaded the land. Everywhere it passed, the sky and the earth were pitch black. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed as he gazed into the distance. Only now did he notice that the darkness that surged over wasn't true darkness, but it was a boundless number of strange insects that were covered in bone spikes and black armor. Every single one of these insects was enormous, and their numbers were uncountable. "That's the sky insect avatar?" Zhuowen couldn't help but gasp when he saw the dense mass of practically innumerable black beetles. Zhuowen was extremely familiar with these black beetles. Wasn't it the heavenly insect clone that had almost destroyed the ninth hell realm? Moreover, the endless sky insect avatar's aura was even more terrifying than the sky insect avatar that had appeared in the 9 netherworld realm. With so many sky insect avatars, even celestial saints would find it difficult to resist. Soon after, Zhuowen saw a figure on the other side of the land. It was a middle-aged man. He wore a green robe and had his hair tied up in a bun. His body revealed a free and easy aura. The moment he saw the middle-aged man, Zhuowen could not help but exclaim in a low voice. Taoist Song Long. Zhuowen, who had seen Taoist Song Long's shadow in Azure Dragon Hall, recognized the identity of this figure at a glance. He was the master of Azure Dragon Hall, Taoist Song Long. Taoist Song Long's gaze was indifferent as he stood in the wind. His robe fluttered as he stared at the endless sky insect avatars that were getting closer and closer. He did not shrink back, but pointed at the void. Whoosh! Chapter 1637. Images. Zhuowen's eyes widened when he saw the monstrous yellow springs that connected the 9 heavens and the 9 underworlds. He was deeply shocked. Zhuowen had never thought that the yellow spring that Taoist Master Song Long had used would be so terrifying and huge. He quickly thought of his pitiful 220 yellow spring water droplets. These water droplets couldn't even form a small pool, right? Whoosh! The yellow spring instantly swept out, blotting out the sky and covering the earth. In an instant, it drowned the heavenly worm in front of him. Zhuowen also heard countless strange sizzling sounds, as if something was being burned. This strange sound only lasted for about 15 minutes before the endless yellow springs suddenly contracted again and again. In the end, it transformed into a circle of reincarnation, while the terrifying celestial insect avatar completely disappeared. How terrifying! Zhuowen stared at this scene, and could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. At the same time, there was a hint of understanding in his eyes. Just now, every move that Taoist Master Song Long had used, the slaughtering yellow spring finger, even the most minute details, was like a movie, constantly replaying in Zhuowen's mind. Zhuowen kept recalling the scene just now, and the understanding in his eyes grew stronger. Then he slowly pointed out a finger. Instantly, the 220 yellow springs water droplets that surrounded him suddenly gathered together and formed a thin stream. The moment the yellow spring water droplets formed the thin stream, the yellow spring water droplets suddenly evolved into a circle of reincarnation. Half of it evolved into life, while the other half evolved into death. The will of life was defense, while the will of death was attack. Life and death were only separated by a single thought. Zhuowen slowly raised his head, and the light in his eyes grew brighter and brighter. Finally, he suddenly pointed out a finger again, and the yellow spring water droplet turned into an arrow that left the bowstring. Zhuowen suddenly pinched it between his fingers. The saint power in his left hand turned into a bow, and his right hand pulled the bowstring into a full moon. When he let go, the yellow spring arrow turned into an arrow that left the bowstring and shot out, piercing through the void. After the underworld arrow returned, it once again transformed into a long sword, emitting a sharp edge. It was as cold as the dead of winter, bone-chilling, as if a fishbone was stuck in one's throat. Again and again, Zhuowen switched between the yellow spring's forms, alternating between an offensive and defensive form. As for Zhuowen, he also executed the slaughtering finger of the yellow springs again and again. It was as though he was constantly practicing. While Zhuowen was in a state of epiphany, the scene did not stop there. After Taoist Master Song Long killed countless clones of the celestial worms in an instant, he suddenly looked towards the horizon and sighed. I never thought that the celestial armor continent would have such a day. I thought this was a land of freedom, but I never thought that it was just a cage. Alas! Just as Taoist Song Long finished speaking, the sky suddenly split open, and from the depths of the split-open sky, a huge hand suddenly stretched down. This huge hand was too terrifying. It covered the sky and actually tore apart the entire sky. Then, figures with terrifying auras surged out from the devastated land. These figures were like moths to a flame, rushing towards the huge hand. However, the huge hand did not pay any attention to these terrifying experts. Rumble. The huge hand suddenly reached into the ground, and in an instant, the entire land began to crack. Violent tremors spread throughout the land, as though the land was about to split open. Zhuowen was in a state of epiphany, so he did not see this scene. However, Xiaohei had appeared on Zhuowen's shoulder at some point in time. She looked at this scene with a sorrowful gaze. Master had schemed and planned for hundreds of thousands of years in order to protect the celestial armor continent from being invaded. Even though Master predicted that the mastermind behind the scenes would be terrifying, in the end he did not expect it to be so terrifying. The prosperous celestial armor continent eventually declined to its current state. Fuxi was once the son of destiny that Master recognized, but later on he disappeared. After 10,000 years, the Fuxi cauldron reappeared, but it chose Zhuowen. I know that Master must have arranged this somehow. Back then, Master did not tell me what kind of existence tore apart the sky of the celestial armor continent. That period of time was truly too tragic. Why didn't Master tell me who the mastermind behind the scenes was until he died? Also, Master's body was not buried in the dark corpse forbidden ground. Also, who was buried in the divine tomb? Who was the mastermind behind the scenes? After the huge hand reached into the ground and countless experts fell, the scene came to an abrupt end. However, Xiaohei's eyes were filled with sorrow and helplessness. Although it had experienced the catastrophe 10,000 years ago, it did not know the exact details of the catastrophe. Many people believed that it was the heavenly insect of the chaotic temple who had caused the catastrophe 10,000 years ago. However, Xiaohei knew that the heavenly insect was just a puppet used by someone else. The real mastermind behind the scenes was too terrifying. Even the supreme experts of the divine transformation realm had fallen because of the mastermind behind the scenes. The scene gradually disappeared. The spirit of the blood cauldron was sweating profusely. That memory was also extremely painful for him. Those peerless experts were as insignificant as dust. The spirit of the blood cauldron still trembled with fear when he thought about it now. Boom. Suddenly, a strange power surrounded Zhuowen. At this moment, Zhuowen slowly closed his eyes. Above his head, the laws of heaven and earth suddenly descended. Like the most loyal guards, they erected barriers around him. The profound understanding realm. This kid has entered the profound understanding realm again. To be able to enter the mystic comprehending stage from the heavenly saint stage, this is the first time I've seen someone like him. This child is indeed different from other ancient martial art practitioners. Xiaohei took a few steps back. It stared at Zhuowen, whose eyes were closed, with a hint of hope in its eyes. Back then, Fuxi was recognized as the son of destiny by Master. However, the plan that had been planned for hundreds of thousands of years still failed. Now that Fuxi has disappeared and the Fuxi cauldron has been obtained by this kid, could this kid be the real son of destiny? Xiaohei murmured in a low voice. It looked at Zhuowen and its eyes became brighter and brighter. Back when Zhuowen was still very weak, he had entered the profound understanding realm. At that time, Xiaohei did not pay much attention to it. After all, the weaker one was, the easier it was to enter the profound understanding realm. However, later on, Zhuowen had entered the profound understanding realm several times. Although Xiaohei was surprised, it did not take it to heart. However, Zhuowen was now a heavenly saint realm saint. Generally, it was very difficult to become a saint, and it was even more difficult to enter the profound understanding realm after becoming a saint. However, Zhuowen had done it. He had entered the profound understanding realm again. At this moment, Xiaohei felt that Zhuowen was extraordinary. This was not the first time Xiaohei felt this way. When it was willing to become Zhuowen's dragon soul, it had felt this way in its heart. That was why it had followed Zhuowen impulsively. Xiaohei began to understand that it had not followed Zhuowen impulsively. It had been arranged by the heavens. Great. Great Nether Saint Dragon? Oh my god. Where did this kid come from? Why does he have so many amazing things on him? The spirit of the blood cauldron glanced at Xiaohei and rubbed its eyes. It immediately recognized Xiaohei's figure. Its legs went soft and it almost fell to the ground. Xiao He did not pay attention to the spirit of the blood cauldron. It knew that since the blood cauldron was left behind 10,000 years ago, it was not strange for it to recognize it. When Zhuowen entered the profound understanding realm, in the outside world, in the Ice-Fire Manor, which was 7 or 8 mansions away from the blood-refining manor, a jade slip was quietly handed over to the young master of the Ice-Fire Manor, Jiang Binhan. Young master, this is a communication jade slip sent by the manor master of the blood-refining manor, Shuehentian. It is said that this jade slip contains extremely important information, and it is the information that you are most interested in. A gray-robed old man bent over and presented a jade slip with both hands. He placed it in front of a handsome young man. This handsome young man was the young master of the Ice-Fire Manor, Jiang Binhan, who had appeared in the southern barbarian lands last time. Oh, information that I am interested in? Could it be? Jiang Binhan's eyes slowly narrowed. Soon after, his right hand gently picked up the jade strip in the old man's hand. Soon after, his mind entered the jade strip. After checking for a moment, he suddenly opened his eyes. There was a sharp glint in his eyes. Elder Fong, prepare a chaos shuttle and bring 5 guards to the blood-refining manor. But remember, do not make a big fuss. This time we will go light, Jiang Binhan said in a deep voice. Elder Fong was stunned for a moment, but he immediately understood. He cupped his hands and said, "This old servant understands." Thus Jiang Binhan secretly left the Ice-Fire family with Elder Fong and his 5 personal guards. Time flew by and another month passed. On this day, in the blood cauldron, Zhuowen's body, which was surrounded by the laws of heaven and earth, suddenly surged with an even more terrifying aura. This aura was like a giant rock soaring and rising continuously. Xiao Hei's small eyes suddenly narrowed. He grinned and said, "The mystic comprehending state has allowed this kid to advance again." At this moment, the laws of heaven and earth around Zhuowen slowly dissipated. He opened his eyes and a sharp light flashed in his eyes. He was pleasantly surprised to find that the aura in his body was several times stronger than before. Young Sky Saint stage? Zhuowen clenched his fist. He could feel the saint energy in his dantian that was several times stronger than before. He could not help but be pleasantly surprised. Because of the slaughtering finger of Acheron, you entered the Epiphany realm. Then you attracted the laws of heaven and earth and entered the mystic comprehending state from the Epiphany realm, Xiao He said with a faint smile. Zhuowen nodded and revealed a look of realization. After thinking carefully, he recalled what had happened before. However, when Zhuowen recalled how the Tsang Dragon Taoist master fought against the endless heavenly worm clones, his eyes suddenly lit up. He stared at Xiao He and said, "Xiao He, back then, you said that I would know about the catastrophe from 10,000 years ago when I entered the Central Plains. Now that I've entered the Central Plains, shouldn't you tell me what happened back then?" Xiao Hei's eyes flashed and asked, "You really want to know?" Zhuowen nodded seriously. Xiao He sighed and said, "It's a long story. In fact, the catastrophe is inseparable from the heavenly worm. The heavenly worm has an extremely terrifying reproductive ability. As long as its main body is not destroyed, it can create endless clones. Chapter 1638. SS Demon Revealing Mirror. It's that simple? Is Skyworm really that terrifying? Zhuowen stared deeply at Xiao He and asked indifferently. Xiao He had said that Skyworm was only a part of the catastrophe. Zhuowen did not believe that Skyworm was the cause of all the catastrophes. After all, even gods had died in the catastrophe 10,000 years ago. No matter how powerful Skyworm was, could it be capable of killing godhood experts? Xiao He gently sighed when he saw Zhuowen's gaze gradually sharpen. Aside from Skyworm, there is indeed an even more terrifying mastermind behind the scenes. However, I actually don't know much about what kind of existence that mastermind is. You don't know much about it either? Didn't you take part in the war 10,000 years ago? You still don't know who the mastermind behind that battle is? Zhuowen frowned slightly. However, Blackie shook his head and said, "Back then, this dragon master was only a celestial sage existence. At that time, although the celestial sage was a supreme expert, compared to a god-state expert, it could be said to be insignificant. The ones who truly fought against the mastermind back then were several powerful godhood experts from the heavenly armor continent. No one knows the outcome of that battle. All we know is that after the battle, the godhood experts of the heavenly armor continent either vanished or died. The mastermind never appeared again. Although Skyworm's catastrophe was terrifying, it was sealed away in the end and handed over to the chaotic temple to suppress. With that, Xiaohe looked at Zhuowen with a complicated gaze. He said, "If you really want to know the truth behind the catastrophe, perhaps the chaotic temple will have relevant records. However, these records are definitely secrets of the chaotic temple. It's unlikely that an outsider like you can obtain them." Zhuowen's gaze became rather complicated when he heard Xiaohe's words. He could glean a lot of information from Xiaohe's words. The catastrophe 10,000 years ago was not as simple as Zhuowen had imagined. Moreover, there were several experts in the divine transformation realm on the heavenly armor continent at that time. This was beyond Zhuowen's expectations. Looks like one of the deity realm experts is buried in the god's tomb in the Nether Corpse Extremis, right? Zhuowen muttered to himself with a thoughtful look in his eyes. "Brat, you must make a trip to the Primal Chaos Temple." Putting aside the truth behind the calamity 10,000 years ago, the Primal Chaos Temple is probably the only place where your little lover can find a saint immortal, Xiaohe said with its paws crossed. Zhuowen nodded. He had inherited the Baifeng Sea of Consciousness, so he naturally knew how to get to the Primal Chaos Temple. Coincidentally, the Green Lotus Mansion was on the route to the Primal Chaos Temple. As he headed to the chaotic divine temple, Zhuowen could pay a visit to the Bai clan in the Azure Lotus Manor. After all, he had promised the Baifeng that he would visit the Bai clan and return the items the Baifeng had left behind. "Senior, how long can I stay here?" Zhuowen suddenly asked the Blood Cauldron spirit. At this moment, the Blood Cauldron spirit's attitude was much better than before. It hurriedly said, "Little friend, you can stay as long as you want. The reason I opened the entrance to the Blood Refinement Divine Pond was to vent the resentment in my body. Since the resentment has been expelled, I won't open the Blood Refinement Divine Pond in the future. Little friend, you'll be the last person to enter the Blood Refinement Divine Pond. Since you're the last person, you can stay as long as you want," the Blood Cauldron spirit said with a smile. Zhuowen's eyes lit up. He cupped his fists together and said, "Thank you, senior." With that, Zhuowen jumped into the blood pool again without any hesitation. The blood qi in the blood pool was extremely dense. He had just advanced to the Yang Sky Saint stage, so he could use the blood qi to consolidate his foundation. Seeing Zhuowen's impolite behavior, the Blood Cauldron spirit's face twitched. He had not expected Zhuowen to be so impolite. However, when he thought of the first mountain god's terrifying gaze and the fact that Zhuowen had helped him expel the resentment in his body, the Blood Cauldron spirit did not say anything. The gold lightning body quenching slurry has not been used up yet. This time, I'll wait for my saint body to absorb all of the gold lightning body quenching slurry before I go out. Inside the blood pool, Zhuowen waved his right hand and separated the Greater Success Saint physique from his body. He then took out the remaining golden lightning body tempering slurry and gave it to the Greater Success Saint physique's clone. Then, he calmly absorbed the blood force and consolidated his cultivation. Although the blood qi in the Blood Refinement Divine Pool was very powerful, Zhuowen realized that after he had used the blood qi to advance to the Heavenly Saint realm, his body seemed to have developed some kind of resistance to the blood qi. The surging blood qi was not as easy to absorb and transform into saint power as it was at the beginning. However, Zhuowen did not care. This time, he had relied on the Blood Refinement Divine Pool to advance from the shattering Profound Saint realm to the Heavenly Een Saint realm. Because he had entered the Profound Saint realm, he had advanced to the Heavenly Sun Saint realm in one fell swoop. In the Heavenly Saint realm, he had been able to advance by 2 small realms. This kind of advancement speed was already very fast. If he did not polish and consolidate it properly, Zhuowen was afraid that his foundation would be unstable. The purpose of him entering the blood pool was not to increase his own saint energy to raise his cultivation base. Instead, it was to consolidate his current cultivation base. At the same time, Zhuowen waved his right hand and summoned Long Tian. Before Zhuowen had entered the clouds of resentment, he had already summoned Long Tian into the Azure Dragon Palace. Lord Longwen, this is the Blood Refinement Divine Pool? Long Tian looked around and could not help but exclaim. Yes. This Blood Refinement Divine Pool is full of blood energy. You should also soak in it. Your cultivation has reached the pure profound saint realm. After soaking in this blood pool, you should be able to reach the peak of the shattering profound saint realm, Zhuowen said as he nodded. The blood cauldron's spirit's mouth twitched. This Zhuowen really treated the Blood Refinement Divine Pool as his own home. He was so rude as to ask Long Tian to soak in it. Long Tian's eyes were filled with excitement. He nodded and jumped into the Blood Refinement Divine Pool without any hesitation. Time gradually passed. While Zhuowen was still in the Blood Refinement Divine Pool, a group of uninvited guests had arrived in the sky above the Blood Refinement Mansion in the outside world. Swoosh! A long rainbow instantly cut through the void and swept across the sky above the Blood Refinement County. This long rainbow contained an extremely terrifying aura, and immediately attracted the attention of countless cultivators in the Blood Refinement County. This is the Chaos Shuttle? Which big shot has come to our Blood Refinement Mansion's Blood Refinement County? Many of the sharp-eyed people instantly recognized the shape of the huge shuttle in the long rainbow, and couldn't help but exclaim. The Chaos Shuttle was extremely famous in the central region. It was said that this Chaos Shuttle came from the Saint Master of the Chaos Divine Temple. Its speed was almost the same as the Chaos Beast. Moreover, the Chaos Shuttle was more convenient than the Chaos Behemoth in that one did not need to buy a ticket or wait for the Chaos Behemoth at a fixed location. It could take off at any time, anywhere, and cross several prefectures to reach its destination. There was no doubt that the Chaos Shuttle was much more convenient than the Chaos Beast. The price of the Chaos Shuttle was also extremely high. It was not something that ordinary forces could afford. It was said that the price of a Chaos Shuttle was equivalent to 5 heaven-defying saint treasures. This was an extremely terrifying price. Heaven-defying saint treasures were not something that any force could afford. Moreover, an ordinary force could not afford to take out 5 of them at once. It was precisely because of the high price of the Chaos Shuttle that only major forces could afford it. Moreover, those who could use the Chaos Shuttle were undoubtedly important figures in the major forces. This was also the main reason why the other warriors in the Blood Refinement County knew that a big shot had come after recognizing the Chaos Shuttle. In the Blood Refinement Mansion's Blood Refinement Square, Xue Hentian had already arrived with Supervisor Tsongfeng, the 6 great commanders, many generals, and the higher-ups of the Blood Refinement Mansion. After the cauldron knocking incident, the Blood Refinement Square was devastated. However, with the manpower and material resources of the Blood Refinement Mansion, the Blood Refinement Square was restored to its original state. Swoosh! The Chaos Shuttle quickly arrived at the Blood Refinement Square, and immediately descended vertically. The cabin of the Chaos Shuttle opened and 7 figures walked out. The person in the lead was young. He was dressed in a white robe and was extraordinarily handsome and elegant. Beside the young man was a gray-robed old man. The gray-robed old man seemed rather ordinary, but from the light that constantly flickered in his eyes, it was clear that he was extraordinary. Xue Hentian stared at the gray-robed elder and focused his gaze. He could feel a strong sense of threat from the gray-robed elder. The gray-robed elder was definitely a terrifying expert who had reached the peak of the heaven-defying saint stage. Behind him were 5 personal guards in armor. The 5 personal guards' eyes were bright, and they walked like dragons and tigers. Their bodies emitted a rather powerful aura. Upon closer inspection, one could see that the 5 personal guards were all at the heaven-defying saint stage. However, their auras were much weaker than the gray-robed elder, Xue Hentian, and the first commander. They should be at the initial stage of the heaven-defying saint stage. Haha, young Master Zhang's arrival really brings light to my humble Blood Refinement Mansion. Xue Hentian immediately went up to greet him with a large group of people. He bowed and laughed. Jiang Binhan smiled and said, Mansion Master Shui, you're too kind. I'm sure Mansion Master Shui knows the purpose of my visit, right? Shui Hentian nodded and said, Young Master Jiang, don't worry. The person you want is in the blood cauldron. I think that person will appear soon. When that time comes, we'll capture him and let young Master Jiang deal with him. Jiang Binhan nodded imperceptibly. His gaze fell on the blood cauldron as he said nonchalantly, If Mansion Master Shui is telling the truth and this person is really the person I'm looking for, I won't mistreat Mansion Master Shui. Upon hearing this, Shui Henshin's eyes lit up with excitement. He quickly cupped his fists and said in a deep voice, It's true. This person was held hostage by Zhuowen for a period of time. He could sense the aura on Zhuowen's body. He was also the one who told me Muj was true identity. Jiang Binhan took another look at Shui Emo. His eyes narrowed as he said, The Blood Demon clan is deeply rooted in the Blood Refinement Mansion. Back then, there was only one Mansion Master. If the Blood Demon clan hadn't added fuel to the fire, I don't think Mansion Master Shui would have been able to completely overthrow the Nine Sons Lord of Heaven, right? On the other hand, the Blood Devil Qi on your body is even denser. Looks like the Blood Devil clan has placed their hopes on you. If the Blood Devil clan can really produce another Blood Immortal, then the Blood Devil clan may rise again. Shui Mo's eyes narrowed as he lowered his head. The Blood Demon clan was extremely powerful in the Blood Refinement Mansion. Even Shui Hentian had to think twice. However, in front of the Ice Fire family, they were insignificant. Shui Mo didn't dare to act recklessly in front of Jiang Binhan. Jiang Binhan shifted his gaze and immediately asked the gray-clothed elder beside him, Elder Fong, did you bring the demon revealing mirror? Chapter 1639. Exiting the cauldron, Sect Master Shui. Can I wait at the Blood Refinement Square? Jiang Binhan cupped his hands at Shui Hentian. His tone was polite, but it was unquestionable. Shui Henshin's eyes flickered, but he smiled and said, Since young Master Jiang wants to wait at the Blood Refinement Square, I have no objections. As he spoke, Shui Hentian clapped his hands. Immediately, a graceful maid walked over. On the elevated platform around the square, there were many tables with delicious delicacies placed on top of them. Young Master Jiang, please take a seat. Shui Hentian made an inviting gesture towards Jiang Binhan. Naturally, Jiang Binhan did not stand on ceremony as he led Old Fong and the rest to the table. Shui Hentian accompanied Jiang Binhan and sat down. The young master of the Ice and Fire clan, Jiang Binhan, is here. Zhuowen is finished. Shui Mo shook his head. He looked at Shui Ding with pity. He knew that once Zhuowen came out of Shui Ding, he would be hunted down endlessly. Haha. I see that young Master Jiang cares so much about Zhuowen. According to what I know, young Master Zhuowen comes from the 4 great regions. I wonder why young Master Jiang is so obsessed with him? Shui Hentian asked with a smile as he poured a cup of wine for Jiang Binhan. Jiang Binhan's eyes turned cold. Elder Fong, who was beside him, stared coldly at Shui Hentian. Shui Henshin's hands trembled, and he almost lost his grip on the wine jug. He knew that he had said something wrong. Sect Master Shui, you talk too much today. Jiang Binhan played with the wine cup and continued. There are some things that I don't think Sect Master Shui needs to know in detail. Zhuowen was related to the lost origin of the Ice and Fire holy symbol. Jiang Binhan naturally could not reveal it. It was the deepest secret in his heart. He knew very well that the origin of the Ice and Fire holy symbol really existed in Zhuowen's body. In that case, he would do whatever it took to get him. Jiang Binhan knew very well that if he could really find this wisp of origin, both his father and the ancestors in the family would remember him as a great merit, and his chances of inheriting the position of the family head in the future would be very high. The Ice and Fire family was a big family, and there were many geniuses in the younger generation. There were also several geniuses who were stronger than him. Jiang Binhan was at a disadvantage in terms of talent, so he could only put in a lot of effort in terms of contribution. With this huge contribution and his father's status, there would be very little obstacles for him to compete for the position of patriarch in the future. I hope this Zhuowen won't disappoint me. This time, I've even brought the demon revealing mirror. Once this thing shines on him, I'll be able to see all his secrets. The demon-revealing mirror is especially sensitive to the aura of the holy symbol of ice fire. Jiang Binhan finished the wine in his hand in one gulp and muttered to himself. The first general, Shi Lai, who was the leader of the many generals, stared at Xue Ding with a complicated gaze. In this commander battle, he had indeed won the position of commander. He was also the well-deserved first among all the generals, but he was not happy. This was because this time, there was someone who had far surpassed him. Although this person was not a general, he had shocked the world with a single brilliant feat in terms of knocking on the Xue Ding. He had far surpassed Shi Lai. After knocking on the Xue Ding 20 times, he had opened the entrance to the blood-refining divine pond. I'm not willing to lose to him. If this person comes out, I'll be the first to test him. I want to wash away the shame of the commander battle with my own hands. Thinking of this, Shi Lai clenched his fists and stared at the Xue Ding standing in the middle of the square. Time passed slowly. The blood-refining square was already heavily guarded. Xue Hentian had gathered almost all the elite forces of the blood-refining mansion in the square. Nearly 1,000 soldiers in blood-red heavy armor surrounded the blood-refining square. In an instant, the square was filled with a dense killing aura. It was extremely terrifying. Many of the fighters in the Blood Jade County also sensed that something was wrong. Many of them gathered outside the Blood Refinement Plaza. When they saw that the Blood Refinement Plaza was heavily guarded, many of them began to discuss spiritedly. They were not fools. Naturally, they knew why Xue Hentian sect had so many soldiers surrounding the square. There was only one reason, and that was the young man Mu Zhuo, who had knocked on the Xue Ding 20 times and entered the blood-refining divine pond. It seems that the big shot who rode the Chaos Shuttle should be the young master of the Ice and Fire family, Jiang Binhan. Could it be that Jiang Binhan is also here for Mu Zhuo? Many people's eyes fell on Jiang Binhan, who was sitting on the table. They were all shocked. A month passed slowly. Jiang Binhan was very patient. He sat on the table and waited silently. On this day, the sun was high in the sky. Golden sunlight shone on the ground, bringing with it strands of warmth. Suddenly, the entire blood-refining square shook violently. Soon after, the Xue Ding standing in the middle of the square spewed out a terrifying blood qi. Blood qi churned, forming a circular door that was constantly rotating. The door slowly split open, and a slender figure walked out from within. Swoosh! Swoosh! At the instant this figure appeared, countless gazes gathered on this figure like lightning. There was doubt, curiosity, excitement, and anticipation. Dang! 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 The moment the figure appeared, nearly 1,000 soldiers in blood-colored heavy armor took a step forward. A terrifying murderous aura turned into an invisible pressure that crushed down from the sky. It was as if it wanted to crush the figure. Unfortunately, this murderous aura was completely useless against this figure. With a wave of his sleeve, the murderous aura that came crashing down was completely dispersed. Jiang Binhan, who was originally sitting on the table, stared at the figure with his eyes as bright as torches. The corners of his mouth curled up, and he said faintly, "You're finally out. You're the first person who could make me wait for so long." Not far away, Xue Hentian slowly stood up. He stared coldly at Zhuowen and said, "Mu Zhuo, get over here if you don't want to die." Zhuowen glanced at Xue Hentian, and then at Jiang Binhan. His eyes revealed a trace of coldness. He did not expect that Jiang Binhan, the young master of the Ice-Fire family, would also come. Blood Demon. Zhuowen glanced at Blood Demon, who was not far away. This caused Blood Demon to tremble. He could feel the chilling murderous aura in Zhuowen's eyes when he looked at him. This murderous aura made Blood Demon feel as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. What a terrifying gaze. When did Zhuowen's gaze become so terrifying? Is he bluffing? Blood Demon's heart thumped wildly. He did not dare to look into Zhuowen's eyes. He could acutely feel that the pressure that Zhuowen gave him was much more terrifying than before he entered the blood cauldron. However, when Blood Demon looked at the thousands of heavily armored soldiers around him, as well as Xue Hentian, the generals, and the 6 great commanders, he felt a lot more at ease. Moreover, Jiang Binhan, the young master of the Ice-Fire family, was also here. Under such a heavy encirclement, it would be impossible for Mu to escape. There was no doubt that he would die. Mujua, I'm not satisfied with the blood cauldron strike. I would like to test your strength. Use your full strength and let me see if you are qualified to defeat me. Just when the surrounding atmosphere had frozen to an extremely strange state, a loud shout broke the strange atmosphere. Shirlai took a step forward. His speed was as fast as lightning as he charged toward Zhuowen. The moment he rushed out, he stretched out his hands. Immediately, the 4 mountains of wind, thunder, rain, and snow appeared above his head. For a moment, his power was unparalleled, like a god descending to the mortal world. Shirlai, this fellow. What is he trying to do? Xue Hentian frowned. He had not allowed Shirlai to come out. Shirlai had taken the initiative to jump out. Looking at Shirlai, who had taken the initiative to rush over, Zhuowen's gaze was indifferent. He said faintly, "You don't need me to use my full strength." What a joke. Perhaps you have improved after entering the blood refinement deity pond. However, if we really fight, you might not be my match. Before you speak, you'd better weigh your own strength first. Veins popped out on Shirlai's forehead. Zhuowen's words were an insult to him, especially the indifference in Zhuowen's eyes. It was as if Zhuowen did not even take him seriously. This completely infuriated Shirlai. Rumble. With a roar, Shirlai swung his hands. The 4 mountains of wind, thunder, rain, and snow formed a line and shot towards Zhuowen. Zhuowen stood quietly on the spot, waiting for the wind, thunder, rain, and snow to completely close in. He suddenly flipped his right hand, and the Taichi dragon seal suddenly appeared. Then a huge blood dragon soared into the sky and heavily collided with the 4 huge mountains. Ruthless slaughter. Zhuowen clenched his right hand and mercilessly used the 3rd dragon skill, Ruthless Slaughter. Instantly, the Ruthless Slaughter dragon shadow roared, and its body began to collapse. A terrifying explosion of energy erupted from the dragon's body, and instantly engulfed the 4 mountains. Crack! The 4 mountains instantly collapsed. Shirlai spat out a mouthful of blood and flew backwards, smashing heavily onto the ground. Young Sky Saint stage? How did this lad's cultivation break through so quickly? Xue Hentian stood up and stared at Zhuowen in shock. Rumble! Shirlai smashed onto the ground and spat out a mouthful of blood. Only then did he manage to crawl up. His gaze was desolate as he stared at Zhuowen's figure. In the end, he let out a bitter laugh and slowly left the blood refinement plaza. His back was bleak and lonely. Young Sky Saint stage. The blood demon's pupils unconsciously shrank. No wonder Zhuowen's eyes gave him a strong sense of danger. This lad's cultivation had unknowingly reached the Young Sky Saint stage. Moreover, since this lad could defeat Shirlai so easily, the blood demon knew that it would be extremely easy for Zhuowen to kill him. Thinking of this, the blood demon's eyes were filled with fear. He slowly retreated and prepared to leave this place. He did not want to face Zhuowen right now. This lad had already matured and his strength was too terrifying. Blood demon, where do you think you're going? Zhuowen's gaze suddenly fell on the blood demon. The dense killing intent in his eyes made the blood demon's scalp tingle. He immediately took a step back and quickly retreated. Chapter 1640. Great Mountain River Diagram Go. Shueimo did not hesitate and immediately fled towards the outside of the square. His speed was extremely fast. Murderous intent erupted from Zhuowen's eyes. He took a step forward and chased after Shueimo at lightning speed. You wish to kill under my watch? You are courting death. Xue Hentian's cold voice sounded. Soon after, he flicked his finger and took out his heaven-defying saint weapon, Black Dragon Blade. His figure flashed and directly intercepted Zhuowen. Jiang Binhan quietly sat on the table and glanced at Old Feng beside him. Old Feng nodded his head and immediately took out a round mirror that was the size of 2 palms. This round mirror was surrounded by a purple aura and gave off a demonic aura. Heaven and earth, all living things appear. Old Feng formed a seal with his right hand. Soon after, he pressed his finger on the demon-revealing mirror. Immediately, a purple light surged out from the mirror, and swiftly shone on Zhuo Wen's body. The instant the purple glow landed on his body, a cold glow stood on Zhuo Wen's body. It was as if his entire body had been completely seen through by the purple glow, and all his secrets had been seen through. Zhuo Wen revealed a surprised and bewildered expression, and then his gaze descended onto the demon reveal mirror in the hand of old Feng, who stood by Jiang Binhan's side. At this moment, the strand of violet light that flashed out from the demon reveal mirror had been completely restrained. Soon after, the surface of the mirror began to fluctuate continuously, as if it was containing a certain image. The image gradually became clear. Jiang Binhan focused his eyes and immediately saw that it was a face. This face was Zhuo Wen's real face. It is indeed Zhuo Wen. Jiang Binhan's eyes narrowed slightly as the corners of his mouth lifted. Soon after, he once again looked at old Feng. The latter nodded his head and pointed at the mirror with his right hand. The image on the mirror changed once again. However, this time, the image appeared for a longer time. After the image flickered for a long time, a talisman that was a combination of ice and fire slowly appeared. Jiang Binhan's pupils involuntarily shrunk when he saw the ice and fire talisman. Soon after, his expression was replaced by excitement. "Put it away," Jiang Binhan said to Elder Feng. Elder Feng nodded and nimbly put away the demon-revealing mirror. He then looked towards Jiang Binhan and said, "Young master, the demon-revealing mirror should be correct. That item is on this person. Should we?" Jiang Binhan narrowed his eyes and sneered. "Don't worry, this person won't be able to escape from our grasp. He's just a mere young Sky Saint stage cultivator. Let Xue Hentian play with him." At this moment, Jiang Binhan was in a great mood. The demon-revealing mirror had confirmed Zhuo Wen's identity, and that the thing he was looking for was on him. He was finally relieved. As for Zhuo Wen, he didn't really care. A mere young Sky Sacred Realm was nothing in his eyes. Slowly picking up the wine on the table, Jiang Binhan took a sip and looked at the battle in the distance indifferently. At this moment, because Zhuo Wen was affected by the demon-revealing mirror, he inevitably slowed down. Xue Hentian seized the opportunity and caught up with him. Muzhua Dai. Xue Hentian's eyes were ferocious. He slashed out with his black dragon blade, and the terrifying blade Qi transformed into a huge black dragon that pounced towards Zhuo Wen. Zhuo Wen frowned slightly. The space in front of him suddenly split open, and he took a sudden step into the space, disappearing from Xue Hentian's sight. The black dragon formed by the saber Qi pounced on empty air. After becoming a heavenly saint, the power of laws in Zhuo Wen's body had increased greatly. The law of the void was unrivaled, and coupled with the law of explosive steps, Zhuo Wen's speed was definitely one of the best among heavenly saints. At this moment, Xue Mo had already escaped the range of the blood-refining square. When he saw Xue Hentian attack, he relaxed. He knew that Xue Hentian's cultivation was more than enough to stop Zhuo Wen. This kid's progress is too fast, but this is as far as it goes. With the elites of the blood-refining mansion and the experts of the Ice-Fire family, Zhuo Wen will definitely die. At this moment, Xue Mo had completely recovered from his earlier panic. His eyes revealed a trace of viciousness. Just as he was about to turn around and watch the battle between Zhuo Wen and Xue Hentian, a sound of breaking air suddenly appeared in front of him. How did you appear in front of me?" Xue Mo took a few steps back and looked at Zhuo Wen with a slightly shocked expression. At this moment, Zhuo Wen had appeared from the void. "You were the one who revealed my identity, right?" Zhuo Wen stood still and asked indifferently. "No. This has nothing to do with me." Xue Hentian guessed it. Xue Mo squeezed out an ugly smile. Zhuo Wen's eyes were like torches. He did not want to waste time talking nonsense with Xue Mo. His right hand formed a claw and clawed at Xue Mo. On the surface of his claw, drops of underworld water gushed out. Blood Demon descends. Xue Mo roared and did not hesitate to use his most powerful trump card. Suddenly, a huge blood demon phantom stepped out from the void behind him. Its huge hand, which was the size of a praying mat, smashed down towards Zhuo Wen. Zhuo Wen's eyes were cold. He stretched out his claw and the underworld water droplets spun at high speed. The blood demon phantom shattered inch by inch like glass. Xue Mo spat out a mouthful of blood. Before he could retreat, Zhuo Wen's claw reached out and grabbed his neck. Immediately, Zhuowen sealed all his meridians and kept him in the Azure Dragon Palace. From the moment Zhuowen appeared to the moment he captured Shui Mo, only 3 breaths of time had passed. It was so fast that it was like the blink of an eye. The moment Zhuowen captured Shui Hentian had already stepped on the void. His body was filled with saber chi that transformed into countless black dragons. At this moment, Zhuowen did not want to be entangled with Shui Hentian for too long. He took a step forward and the void in front of him shattered. Immediately, he planned to step into the void and leave this place. However, the moment he stepped into the void, an ancient figure appeared at the entrance of the void. "Little friend Zhuowen, you can't leave yet. You should go back." The ancient figure looked at Zhuowen indifferently. Immediately, his right palm pierced through the void and blasted towards Zhuowen. His right palm was surrounded by a gray aura. The gray aura was very faint, but it gave Zhuowen a strong sense of danger. Slaughtering finger of the underworld. Zhuowen did not hesitate to use the slaughtering finger of the underworld. 220 underworld water droplets gathered into a thin stream and circled around Zhuowen's fingertip. Then he pointed out with his finger. Rumble. The two collided. Immediately, Zhuowen was shocked to find that the gray aura was like a maggot in a tarsal bone. It followed the old man's palm and drilled into his palm. Fortunately, the underworld water droplets were not to be trifled with. They completely blocked the gray aura. Zhuowen's face turned pale, and he retreated dozens of steps. As for the old man in front of Zhuowen, his body swayed and he only retreated a few steps. The result of this collision was obvious. Zhuowen's face turned ugly. He naturally recognized the old man in front of him. It was the gray-robed old man beside Jiang Binhan. Jiang Binhan called him Elder Fong. Elder Fong was not simple. He was an expert at the peak of the heaven-defying Saint Realm. His strength was even stronger than Shui Hentian's. He was a terrifying existence that was only half a step away from the half-immortal realm. The moment Zhuowen retreated, Shui Hentian's saber chi swept over. Zhuowen had no choice but to explode and dodge the saber chi attack. This young man has mastered the void law. Fortunately, Elder Fong reacted in time. Otherwise, this young man might have used the void to escape. Jiang Binhan, who was sitting on the table, slowly poured a cup of wine. He stared at the battle in the sky as if he was watching a good show. Elder Fong, force him into the blood-refining square. Jiang Binhan suddenly transmitted his voice to the gray-robed old man. The gray-robed old man nodded slightly and waved his sleeve. Suddenly, a stream of gray aura swept toward Zhuowen like a thin stream. After witnessing the extraordinary power of the gray aura, Zhuowen did not dare to be careless. He waved his sleeve and summoned the spirit-devouring lava river. The mighty magma stood in front of him, blocking the gray gas outside. However, the gray gas was truly impressive. It was not affected by the high temperature of the magma at all. It continuously collided with the spirit-devouring magma river, forcing Zhuowen to retreat step by step. In the end, he retreated into the blood-refining square. The moment Zhuowen retreated into the blood-refining square, Jiang Binhan waved his sleeve and took out a scroll. He opened the scroll against the wind, and the images in the scroll were vividly displayed on the paper. Jiang Binhan tapped on the scroll several times and chanted. The surface of the scroll suddenly burst out with an unprecedented brilliance. Then, Jiang Binhan threw the scroll with his right hand. The scroll whizzed out and suddenly enlarged countless times, enveloping the blood refinement square in it. Then mountains, rivers, vast seas, and thousands of miles of mountains and rivers appeared on the scroll. These scenes were laid across the periphery of the blood refining square. They were like the most solid barrier that completely sealed Zhuowen in the blood refining square. Young master, you used the great river and mountain painting to deal with him. Isn't it too wasteful? Elder Fong asked in surprise. Jiang Binhan laughed and waved his hand. It's not wasteful at all. Compared to the thing that this person has, the great river and mountain painting is nothing. We must capture this person this time. There can't be any mistakes. Elder Fong nodded in agreement. Jiang Binhan was right. Compared to the thing that Zhuowen had, the great river and mountain painting was indeed nothing. The heaven-defying great river and mountain painting? Xue Henshin's eyes narrowed, and he could not help but exclaim. The great river and mountain painting was not simple. It was one of Jiang Binhan's many trump cards. It was so powerful that even a heaven-defying sage saint might not be able to escape from it for a while. This was because the great river and mountain painting was a combination of an illusion formation, a maze formation, an offensive formation, and a defensive formation. It was also inscribed with countless powerful restrictions. In addition, it had been nurtured by a heaven-defying sage saint for close to 1,000 years. This holy treasure was far more powerful than ordinary heaven-defying sage saint treasures. Xue Hentian knew very well that if he was trapped in the great river and mountain painting, he would not be able to escape without using the Nine-Yang Dao sword. However, in Xue Henshin's opinion, Jiang Binhan was making a mountain out of a molehill by using the great river and mountain painting to deal with Zhuowen. However, Jiang Binhan was the young master of the ice and fire family. He was rich and imposing, so Xue Hentian naturally would not gossip. Chapter 1641. Duel. At this moment Zhuowen, who was trapped in the great river and mountain painting, frowned slightly. He looked at the mountains and rivers around him and muttered, "Is this a heaven-defying saint treasure, the great river and mountain painting?" Although Zhuowen was trapped inside, he could hear Jiang Binhan's voice clearly. He also knew that he was in a heaven-defying saint treasure. Moreover, from Xue Henshin's expression, Zhuowen could also see that the great river and mountain painting's power was extraordinary. Thinking of this, Zhuowen clenched his right hand, and the yellow spring's water droplets condensed into a yellow arrow. Then he knocked the arrow on the bow and released it. The yellow spring's arrow shot out and blasted the mountains and rivers around him. Boom. However, what caused Zhuowen's eyes to turn gloomy was that although the yellow spring's sharp arrow had shattered the mountains and rivers, more mountains and rivers appeared behind it, as if there was no end to them. This heaven-defying saint treasure is much stronger than the tile that Yang Yi gave you. Even if you use your saint body, I'm afraid you won't be able to break the great river and mountain painting. Xiao Hei's voice sounded in Zhuowen's mind. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice, "Currently, the only thing that can break the great river and mountain painting is the first Yang Dao sword of the Nine-Yang Dao sword. However, this thing can only be used by surprise. If I'm not wrong, Jiang Binhan must have an even more powerful treasure on him." Jiang Binhan is the young master of the ice-fire family. He has many treasures on him. Although you're strong, there's still a gap between you and him. I advise you not to fight him head-on, Xiao Hei said. Zhuowen nodded and said, "I know, but I've already promised Xiao Yu that I'll take Xue Henshin's life. If I can lure Xue Hentian to fight with me, I'll be able to kill him instantly with the first Yang Dao sword." Although the remaining 8 Yang Dao swords were still in Xue Henshin's hands, Zhuowen had Xiao Yu, who had the 9 Yang Dao swords. With Xiao Yu around, Xue Hentian was unable to use the 9 Yang Dao sword. Without the 9 Yang Dao sword, the power of the first Yang Dao sword was enough to kill Xue Hentian. Xiao Hei frowned and said, "Kid, I just asked. Xiao Yu said that she still needs 3 days to completely refine the first Yang Dao sword. Only then will you be able to use the first Yang Dao sword. That's not enough time, right? I will transfer Xiao Yu to the second heaven and earth. With the flow of time there, 3 days will pass in the blink of an eye." As Zhuowen spoke, his thoughts flickered. Xiao Yu and Elder Fu, who were originally in a courtyard in the Green Dragon Square, felt a flash in front of their eyes as they arrived at an unfamiliar place. The two of them were still in a state of shock. Just as they were about to ask, Zhuowen's voice rang in their minds. "The two of you, this is another place in my spatial saint tool. Xiao Yu, please refine the first Yang Dao sword first. Once you're done, hand it over to me. The situation is urgent." "Brother Mu, don't worry. Xiao Yu will definitely refine it as soon as possible." Xiao Yu's beautiful eyes revealed a determined look. Shortly after, the 9 Yang mark on her collarbone surged with fiery energy. This energy swept out like a shuttle and wrapped around the fiery red longsword in front of her, slowly refining it. Zhuowen's thoughts had just come out of the Green Dragon Hall, when he saw Jiang Binhan with his hands behind his back, leading Elder Fong and 5 personal guards to the front of the great river and mountain painting. Jiang Binhan stood in the sky and looked down at Zhuowen. He said indifferently, Zhuowen, you should know why I'm looking for you, right? Previously, I let you escape in the eastern land. Now that you're in the central land, you should understand the significance of the Icefire clan, right? I, Jiang Binhan, am not a bloodthirsty person. Moreover, you're also a talent. If you know what's good for you and hand over that thing, perhaps I, Jiang Binhan, will remember your merit. When the time comes, I'll recommend you to the clan and make you a guest of the clan. As soon as Jiang Binhan said this, Xue Hengqian's expression changed. He stared at Zhuowen, but his heart was in turmoil. Xue Hengqian wasn't someone who didn't know how to read people's expressions. From Jiang Binhan's words and actions, he had already guessed how important that thing on Zhuowen was to Jiang Binhan. Moreover, Jiang Binhan even intended to let bygones be bygones and wanted to recruit Zhuowen to become a guest of the Icefire clan. It should be known that the Icefire clan was one of the top forces in the Central Land. Many warriors in the Central Land wanted to join the Icefire clan and work for it. The main reason why so many warriors flocked to the Icefire clan was naturally the reputation of the Icefire clan. Furthermore, the Icefire clan had abundant resources. Joining the Icefire clan to cultivate was far better than being a rogue cultivator by himself. It could be said that the current conditions proposed by Jiang Binhan were extremely generous. As long as Zhuowen handed over the thing that Jiang Binhan wanted, not only would Jiang Binhan not kill him, but he would also treat him with respect. What exactly does this lad have that makes young Master Jiang so cautious? Xue Hengqian frowned slightly and couldn't help but wonder. Zhuowen looked up at Jiang Binhan. His face was slightly pale, and there was a trace of fear in his eyes. He asked timidly, "Are you serious?" Looking at Zhuowen's appearance, the corners of Jiang Binhan's mouth curled up even more. However, there was some disdain in his heart. At first, he thought that Zhuowen was a person who would rather break than bend. Now that he was trapped by his great river and mountain painting, his true colors were revealed. Of course I'm serious. My goal isn't your cheap life. Since you're sensible enough to hand it over, why would I dirty my hands to kill you? Of course, I'm fair in my rewards and punishments. You've done me a service by giving me that thing. Recommending you to join the Icefire clan is a piece of cake for me. This is an opportunity that others can't even dream of. I think you'd better weigh the pros and cons and think clearly. Jiang Binhan clasped his hands behind his back. His face was full of arrogance, but he was also quite magnanimous. When Zhuowen escaped from Jiang Binhan's hands in the Eastern Land, Jiang Binhan did not intend to pursue the matter. Moreover, Jiang Binhan was rather calm when dealing with matters now. This made Zhuowen think highly of Jiang Binhan. There was no doubt that Jiang Binhan had his own set of rules since he had been the young master of the Icefire clan for so many years. Generally speaking, this kind of person was the most terrifying. Zhuowen secretly raised his guard against Jiang Binhan. Then he suddenly pointed at Xue Hengqian, who was not far away, and said to Jiang Binhan, "As the mansion master of the blood-refining mansion, this man attacked me indiscriminately. He even joined forces with 8 experts in the mansion to besiege me. He's despicable and shameless." At that time, I was only at the fragmented profound Saint Realm, while the mansion master of the blood-refining mansion was already at the heaven-defying Saint Realm. The gap between us was like a chasm, but the mansion master still joined forces with the experts in the mansion to besiege me. I admire his magnanimity very much. However, because of this, I've accumulated some grievances in my heart. Now that I've advanced to the Sun-Sky Saint Realm because of the blood-refining divine pond, I want to have a one-on-one fight with the mansion master of the blood-refining mansion. I'd like to see if that despicable man would dare to attack me if he faced me alone. Zhuowen's face revealed a trace of resentment as he said this. He continued, "Young Master Jiang, I've accumulated some grievances in my heart, so I'd like to exchange pointers with the mansion master first. After the exchange, I'll definitely hand that thing over to young Master Jiang with both hands." Zhuowen's words were reasonable, and there were no loopholes in them. However, Jiang Binhan frowned, and Xue Hengqian was so angry that his teeth itched. Zhuowen's words were really unpleasant to hear. With his many years of experience as the mansion master, How could he endure such insults? Xue Hentian immediately cupped his hands and said to Jiang Binhan, "Young Master Jiang, since this lad has accumulated some grievances and wants to exchange pointers with me, please grant him his wish." Jiang Binhan frowned slightly and looked meaningfully at Zhuowen. After pondering for a moment, he said, "Sure, but the mansion master should stop when the exchange is over. It's best if there's no harm done to him." Xue Henshin's heart shuddered. Jiang Binhan's words were clearly meant to protect Zhuowen. He did not want him to hurt Zhuowen. Jiang Binhan's words immediately made Xue Henshin's anger rise, but he did not show it. He thought to himself, since young Master Jiang wants something from Zhuowen, I'll enter and kill Zhuowen. After that, I'll take his spirit ring and give it to young Master Jiang. At that time, this great merit will be mine. Xue Hentian secretly calculated in his heart. He nodded to Jiang Binhan cautiously and said, "Young Master Jiang, don't worry. I'll act appropriately. I hope young Master Jiang will allow me to enter the great mountain and river diagram first." Jiang Binhan nodded slightly. He formed a seal with his right hand and muttered an incantation. Immediately after, he formed a seal with his right hand and pointed at the barrier of the great mountain and river diagram. Immediately, a circular hole about the height of a person appeared on the barrier. Xue Hentian cupped his fists and stepped inside. The moment he stepped into the great mountain and river diagram, his eyes became extremely cold. A murderous intent instantly locked onto Zhuowen. Feeling the murderous intent in Xue Henshin's eyes, Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and said indifferently, "Mansion Master Xue, you don't look too happy? It seems like I've spoken some facts." Mansion Master Xue isn't very happy. Xue Hentian sneered. "I alone am enough to deal with a mere young Sky Saint stage expert like you. Back then, if you hadn't used some unknown method to get the blood cauldron to help you enter the blood refinement divine pool, do you think I would have to go through so much trouble to encircle and annihilate you? You're just trash who likes to rely on external forces." "Oh, have you said enough, Mansion Master Xue? If you've said enough, then bring it on," Zhuowen said impatiently. Zhuowen's impatience immediately caused the veins on Xue Henshin's forehead to bulge. Soon after, he stomped on the ground and shot out like an arrow that had been released from a bow. His speed had soared to the limit. At the same time, Xue Hentian flicked his finger and took out the black dragon blade. Countless blade chi swept out and transformed into countless black dragon shadows. His aura was like a rainbow, as if a god had descended to the mortal world. Xue Hentian used his full strength right off the bat. It seems like he didn't take my words seriously at all. That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.